So we'll see how much of that we unwind. We've learned a lot, perhaps, about the fact that tariff threats are still present in markets, and so maybe we don't unwind all of that selling, but we will see. Luxury stocks, automakers in focus. Ubisoft, just one stock specific to focus on this morning. There are others, but Ubisoft cancelling 6 games, slashing its guidance, a restructuring happening at that business. So we'll certainly keep an eye on that one. We'll see to what extent that stock trades weaker at the start of trade then, Guy.
Throw a few more in. Let's see what happens with the defence stocks. Let's see what happens with the chip stocks. So you're going to see maybe a little bit of reversal today. We'll see. The taco trade. Are we about to see what it delivers for Europe? Let's find out. Here we go. Here are some numbers. It is time to see what they look like. The FTSE 100 is expected. We're expecting most markets in Europe to be up 6, 7, 8, 9 tenths of 1%, depending on composition. So you can expect this market maybe to climb a little bit. Yesterday, very cautious at this point. Now we have a little bit more clarity. Can we put Greenland in the rearview mirror? That seems to be the trade that increasingly is coming on. We look forward, though. There's plenty of risks out there on the agenda. The BOJ's one, but there's plenty of others out there as well. So the FTSE 100 is up by 6 tenths of 1%. The stock 600, as we await for the rest of the sort of market to kind of fit in, is up a little bit more. Look at the CAC is up. We're up 1.2%. So a little bit of outperformance coming through there. The IBEX is up by 1.2%. So we may be outperforming expectations a little bit on the upside. Anna was mentioning it. Luxury could be an area of focus. The car sector is going to be a big focus. Does defence maybe deliver a downward beat when it comes to the story around the DAX? We'll wait, but it's got the auto sector to fold in there as well. Switzerland was a big focus yesterday as well. We've got plenty to price in to European markets. Sectors, single stocks. Let's find out what's going on. Tom, over to you.
Yeah, luxury is certainly up there. You've got the likes of Kering up 2.9%. The car maker Stellantis is one that's gaining along with many other peers as well. Auto sectors amongst the best performers. Banks also doing very well as a sector, currently up 1.5%. Consumer products, there you go with the luxury space up 1.5%. Autos, tech, all very much in positive territory with gains of more than 1%. Basic resources is one of the least well performing, and you've seen a little bit of a shifting dynamic around silver versus gold, currently at 0.2%. Under the hood, what are you seeing, Anna?
Yeah, it's interesting that actually there is one story that perhaps we have not mentioned and we should have done. This is the deal between Deutsche Börse and Allfunds. In fact, I think it was in earlier in the show, wasn't it? Earlier in the programme. But financial services is the best performing sector actually, and that is partly to do with that Allfunds transaction, because that stock is up by 3.6%. So there is a little bit of M&A to talk about this Thursday morning, as well as all of the trade narrative.
So Jensen Huang, AI Effect, ASML, the biggest points gainer in the market this morning. It's up by over 2%. The pharma sector, which has been a little bit of a concern over the last few days on the tariff story as well, is also performing quite strongly. Novo, Astra up. LVMH is up by 1.83. Even Nestle is getting in on the action as well. So that's where we're seeing the upside, certainly. Schneider's up quite nicely. Defence stocks are down. Defence stocks, in terms of the points, make up the biggest points drops. BAE Systems, Saab are the two biggest drops this morning, but Leonardo's in the mix. Thales is in the mix. Rio's down a little bit. Maybe you take some of the metals trade off, but it's the downside is dominated by all of the big defence names out of Europe. No surprise in terms of what we're seeing there.
And autos is the best performing sector now, and we haven't even got all of the auto companies open yet. I can see BMW not open, so we'll keep an eye on that one. Clearly the removal of the trade threat by President Trump, at least for the moment, is something that is lifting sentiment across these markets. Let's talk about the markets then. We're joined by Michael Masika, our senior EMEA equities strategist here at Bloomberg. And Michael, very nice to have you with us. It is interesting that some of these export-related stocks have fallen more than they're gaining this morning. I mean, wouldn't necessarily expect them to regain everything they'd lost. But certainly, does that tell us something about the journey we've been on through this week? It's felt quite harrowing.
Yes, that's right. The thing is, the uncertainty is back. It's like everyone forgot about tariffs last year. That was something that's, okay, it's priced in, it's done.
Yep.
Now it came back. So, the kind of like, the US administration has shown that it's still unstable regarding that topic, that things can come back.
Yep.
And so there's a bit of caution approach here. So you see a rebound, that's normal. But will we see like a...
Is the right way to play this increasingly just to ignore it? You look through it, it's not going to have effect. At some point that's going to be the wrong trade, but I don't know when that is.
The broader picture is like everyone is very, very long. The positioning is very high.
Yep.
People are very risk on, and they want to stay that way. So what you see are small really small drawdown and bounces, and deep buying, etc. But at the end of the day, the mood is still very bullish and very positive. We're having a monthly survey of strategists. We'll publish it tomorrow. Little sneak peek there, but like most of strategists are still very bullish.
Yeah.
Still pointing to upside. They don't want to cut their targets. They don't want to cut their EPS estimates. They think the environment is positive. So this is just like noise. And we'll see some volatility.
Michael, is what we're hearing from OpenAI and from Jensen Huang, is that just noise, or are the fears around AI bubble being put in the rear view mirror, at least for now? There seems to be a little bit more conviction.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you can see like over the past month or so, the AI trade has been stalling really, except for the semiconductors, which have been like really strong, especially in Europe. The big tech in the US was like kind of, wobbly over the past few weeks. And, maybe that's going to bring back a little bit more.
Is that a healthy dynamic, the fact that investors are now looking and screening out software versus semis?
I think it's healthy because it's all about thematics. You have like thematics that you can play out on a short, medium-term basis. Last year was definitely software and big tech, and last few weeks have been semis. And this is where the orders are coming. This is where the shortages are. This is where investors want to be invested.
Let's just talk a little bit about bond market volatility and equity markets. BOJ tomorrow. It may or may not do something that suppresses the volatility we've seen in the bond market in Japan over the last few days. But is this the kind of the lurking threat that bond market volatility picks up, that Japan is a pre-shock to what could happen in the United States, that the UK was kind of in this mix as well? If we start to see bond market volatility picking up, and it is unbelievably low at the moment, can the equity market ignore that, or does it have to react?
No, it has to react. We've seen even last year, every time bond market volatility was spiking, you had an impact on stock volatility. So it doesn't mean that you will have like a big drawdown, but it will increase volatility on the stock side. It's been driving it. The whole U.S. market has been really responding to bond volatility generally over the past year or so, and it will keep going. It will keep doing so. Yeah.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much indeed. Our senior EMEA equities strategist on a risk-on day for these equity markets, with European stocks up 1.2%. For more market analysis, Skylar Montgomery-Koning from our MLive team joins us now. Skylar, how much relief is there? Will it be sustained? How are you thinking about the risk-on environment that we're now seeing after the challenges of earlier this week?
Yeah, I mean, I think markets are hesitant to price these big policy outcomes because there has been this pattern where Trump makes big statements that he then backs down from. I think that's also why you see on the other side, in this case, Europe, not escalate, because they're hoping for some kind of deal, and saw with Canada that retaliation doesn't really work out well. Now, yesterday we got a reversal of the moves that were attributed to the tariff threats. The U.S. assets and the dollar were perkier, and equities bounced. I think, you can get a bit of a continuation of that, but there are some trades that just make sense in this environment generally, right? So if you're worried about tariff threats or just geopolitics from a broader scale, then you should be positioned in commodities. And gold in particular, there are structural tailwinds from a central bank perspective too that makes that trade make sense. And so while it's crowded, I think people will continue to play that out. And it's the same with like the defense sector. So you're not necessarily thinking about individual trades like Europe's going to get tariff rates of 25% relative to 10%, but you're just thinking about how has the overall environment changed and how does that change my allocation?
Yeah, it's really interesting if markets start to ask themselves if the politics is becoming increasingly performative, Skylar, then, you know, do they risk getting it wrong sometimes when it isn't? I'm interested, though, in us getting back to data. We're getting back to data. We're going to get some PCE data, GDP data today. Is it all too old, Skylar? Will it tell us anything useful?
I don't think it really will. I think it'll largely kind of be glossed over by the market in terms of the PCE data in particular. It's quite old, as in it's October and November data. We already have CPI, and we saw with those data prints that there was some skepticism over how accurate they were. And so I think with these prints as well, we'll get that. And we do have big catalysts coming next week, and we're also looking for headlines. So I think as we head into next week, we've got the Fed meeting on Wednesday, and increasingly, because we're now getting that backlog of data come through, the Fed has a lot of data to look at as we head into this meeting. And on aggregate, it's surprised to the upside, I'd say. If you look at a measure like ESI, so the Economic Surprise Index, but generally too, just the labor market's been a bit stronger. So there's a question of, will they address that hawkishness? Does that mean that that break in the 10-year yield that we've gotten kind of sustains, as well as questions over who will the next Fed chair be? Will Powell resign? And everything going on there, I think, is of increasing relevance.
Skylar, how big a risk is the BOJ tomorrow to bond market volatility?
I think it's relatively low. They don't like to muddy the waters that much, and it's one of the places where you see central bank back down when there's something like an election or volatility. That's very much the mandate across the authorities you see in Japan. They don't want to create more volatility or speculation, and nothing's really expected from the meeting. It's expected to be a pause, and generally what you see too is if they are going to make a policy move, they telegraph it a couple of weeks beforehand, so that's when you get the surprise rather than at the meeting. I don't think that means that the risk of the yen going lower or JGB yields going higher is completely eliminated. I think it just means that you're looking more from the fiscal side of the equation, and you're looking more towards the election than the Bank of Japan.
Maybe them not doing enough, though, and not doing anything is a risk as well. Maybe the market's expecting something, maybe to calm the situation down. It's going to be interesting to watch. Skylar Montgomery-Koenig from our MLive team, thank you very much indeed. Core 6 looks like this. Defense is down, chips are up, luxury's having a pretty good day. Let's figure out what is happening. A little bit more move, a little bit of a move as well in the auto sector. I'm understating that. Let's get the latest with Jennifer Creary.
That's right. We're going to kick off today with a look at some of those automakers. European car makers really getting a boost after US President Donald Trump said that he'd refrain from imposing tariffs on European goods from nations that oppose his plans to acquire Greenland. Trump citing a so-called framework for a future deal, although it's not quite clear what form that agreement will take. But those car makers really getting a boost this morning. Volkswagen up almost 6%, Stellantis up nearly 3%, Volvo Cars up more than 1%. Off of the back of that, Volkswagen also getting a boost from a positive beat on free cash flow for its autos division. Next up, we're taking a look at chips, of course, adding to a rally that we saw in Asia. That's really off of the back of comments made by NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, saying that the global AI build-up will require trillions of dollars of investment, really giving a boost to those chip stocks this morning. Next up, we're going to flip over to luxury. Of course, LVMH, one of the big winners this morning. LVMH up 2%, Hermes up more than 2% as well. Really, that's standing in contrast to earlier this week when LVMH was seen as one of the casualties of President Trump's threats to impose a crushing 200% levy on champagne and wines. Finally, we're looking at defense. Of course, investors have been on a lookout for stocks that are poised to benefit from increased European military spend over Trump's plans to acquire Greenland. Down this morning, Rheinmetall down 2%, Leonardo down 2%, Saab down 2.5% on the open in response to that. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Bloomberg's Jennifer Creary with the stocks that are moving. There's another one we'll add to the list. It took a while to open this morning. Ubisoft fell as much as 21% at the start of trade. In fact, no, 27% now. So considerably weaker, cancelling 6 games, slashing its guidance, restructuring the business from this games maker, Tom.
Just another individual name before we get a more macro look, because right now Beasley coming through with a statement unanimously rejecting Zurich's cash proposal. That's a redhead across the terminal. The stock's a little lower on the back of that news, having popped on expectations, or at least or the news that there was this offer from Zurich. But the board is rejecting that offer. Guy, you're also looking at gilts.
Gilts will do them in just a moment in a bit more detail, but better data in terms of the UK borrowing numbers. That's helping gilts out this morning. We are going to hear from the man of the moment. I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. He's going to be joining us in around 15 minutes' time. We'll come back. Ray Dalio is going to be joining us shortly as well. What's Ray going to have to say on the latest debt situation that is emerging in Japan and elsewhere? We'll find out next. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome to the world of decentralized finance.
Why is it that NFTs have not recovered in the same way that, say, Bitcoin has?
Bloomberg is covering all things crypto.
It's a pretty spectacular story.
The people.
This is the future. This is the 21st century economy.
The transactions.
It snapped up nearly $1 billion of Bitcoin.
And the technology.
We need to build a digital Fort Knox.
That gives people financial freedom, and that's a wonderful thing.
That's extraordinary.
We ride the wave that is Bitcoin.
Bloomberg Crypto, Tuesdays only on Bloomberg.
Join me each week on Wall Street Week for stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, tech, and climate. More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
The trading day is about to start.
And you're already looking for that edge.
The opening trade brings you everything you need to know as markets open across Europe.
I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Anna Edwards.
And I'm Tom McKenzie.
This is your opening trade.
Only on Bloomberg.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories.
The economy has been doing well. That does not tell you what the future is going to be.
We are taking a step-by-step approach, a very systematic approach with India.
This is a time to put a little more defense into your portfolio.
Insight with Haslinda Anand, only on Bloomberg.
What is going to be the consequence for U.S. markets?
We are seeing modest gains across European equity markets.
Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets.
Tune in to Bloomberg Business Week Daily.
We got to talk crypto.
From the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead.
What's the conversation around your company?
Bringing you insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy.
Planning very big things.
A new level of premium.
Plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens.
The floodgates of innovation are going to open up.
You can't fake passion. You either are or you aren't.
Bloomberg Business Week Daily, only on Bloomberg.
Bringing you up to them in the news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Shevrian in Seoul, and this is Bloomberg.
Welcome back to the opening trade, everybody. 16 minutes into Thursday's session, and we see a really strong rally underway for European equity markets. Global stocks gaining after President Donald Trump abandoned his tariff threats against Europe. Europe, of course, getting the best of those gains. And so we see autos stronger. We see luxury goods stronger. We see a about face for some of the sectors that have been so beaten up by that tariff threat, of course. But that's not the only thing that's on the move. Gilt yields also on the move this morning.
Better borrowing data for the UK. Much better borrowing data, actually. Certainly moving gilt markets this morning. Gilts have largely moved in line over the last couple of days. We're seeing a slightly sort of bigger drop this morning in terms of the numbers. If this can be sustained, that's obviously great news. Can it be sustained? It's not as if the UK doesn't have many things that it needs to spend money on right now. If you think about the kind of the geopolitical shifts, defence spending, that keeps coming up in the House of Commons about how the UK is going to manage to increase its defence spending. Plenty of things for the gilt market to think about.
Absolutely, because there's intention there, but absolutely no detail on how we get there. Now, let's think about where we've been through this week. Stocks rallying on the back of that better news that came from Davos. We will get another perspective on what we've been through over the last week in just a moment. Ray Dalio just standing in the wings.
So let's just talk, if you think about what is happening here, Ray is very concerned about what is happening on the debt story. You read his book, you kind of hear all his commentary. So he's concerned. Was Japan, how do I think about Japan in relation to that? The BOJ is going to be there tomorrow. I know Scarlett said yesterday she didn't think it was going to be a risk event. She almost certainly is probably right. But if the BOJ isn't there, if the BOJ is not there to support, Sumitomo is talking about going to 180 on the yen. How does that manifest itself globally?
Yes, and to raise concerns, Ken Griffin was saying that, was what happened in Japan actually a bit of a warning for the United States? There are massive differences, of course. There's not entire parallel in these stories and these narratives, but still, it is a bit of a warning about what excessive concern about debt levels can do.
Griffin said the bond vigilantes came for Japan, they could come for the US, and his warning, he doesn't see that as imminent, but his warning to the House and to the Senate is you have to deal with the deficits, you have to deal with the excess spending. He didn't call out the White House, interestingly, because the tax bill is going to push up that debt load. But this is potentially, is this a canary in the coal mine moment, or does the US continue to dine out on other people's funding?
Yeah, let's see what's on Ray's mind this morning. Let's get back to Davos, to Francine Lacroix. Fran.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anne. I'm delighted to be joined by Ray Dalio. Ray, so good to speak to you. Look, there's a lot going on in Davos. I know you see everything through the lens of 5 big forces. So money, debt, internal conflict, external conflict, acts of nature and technology, AI. There was so much concern about what the president was going to say here on tariffs. You put everything through capital. Are we living through a big capital war?
We haven't begun the capital war yet, and I think draw attention to it. I don't even think people think capital war. They hear a lot about trade war. And how does a capital war work and what is happening today pertaining to the markets and so on? Okay. The big issue is the opposite side of a trade imbalance is a capital imbalance. And so we have an issue now with the changing complexion of what is owned by capital. So central banks buying gold and replacing bonds and other assets. We see these things happening, the changes in that mix. And so President Trump's speech was very, very important because there's a line, a red line, that has to do with military as it pertains to Greenland. And if there is a military move, it has capital war implications. But beyond that, the issue of what is held as a reserve currency and the whole capital issue is something that's extremely important, not paid much attention to, and not understood.
Ray, a lot of U.S. policymakers or U.S. chief executives will push back. But for me, it's very clear that actually this week, if we are, relieved that the U.S. is not invading Greenland militarily, maybe there's a big shift, right, in this alliance. So is there going to be a big de-dollarization? Are you going to see countries outside the U.S. move away from the dollar quite quickly?
Generally speaking, you're seeing a diversification away from the U.S., right? Last year, U.S. markets, wonderful performance, but underperformed the rest of the world. And you're seeing a shift in the assets held, particularly, let's talk about money. In other words, when you look at the gold being up 67%, it's not a precious metal that goes up 60%. It was bought by central banks, particularly, but others, in order to diversify fiat currencies, not just dollars, okay? It also has to do with euros and so on. Fiat currencies, which are essentially debt instruments that get monetized, were the big move of last year. The biggest move, bigger than tech stocks, that was the biggest move.
What historical parallels are you seeing and worrying about right now?
Well, the similar breakdowns of the monetary system, if we're talking about the shifting to gold. There was a breakdown in 1971. Let's go to the monetary system. 1944, we say, what is our system of money? And it was gold, connections to the dollar and other currencies connected to that. And there was the process of creating a lot of debt, which is the claim on money. 1971, that breaks down, and then we go to a fiat monetary system. 2008, interest rates hit zero, we go to quantitative easing. In other words, debt monetization, the buying of a lot of that. 2020, we have COVID. Big deficits, essentially, then big monetizations. With that pattern, there's been a weakening of the monetary system, meaning what is a storehold of wealth that's a medium of exchange that's accepted? That's an issue. And then when we get into a warlike environment, which we've experienced many times in history, countries do not like to hold each other's debts. They worry that some other country will sanction them, and also, you print more money during such periods of time, which devalues money and devalues that debt.
So where are we in the longer-term debt cycle, and actually what do you most worry about over the next 1 to 2 years? What are markets missing?
Okay. I think that they're missing the value of money question, the debt and the understanding of the value of money. I don't think many people would think about, okay, here is what the value of money, and it was even bigger story than the tech stock story, okay? So I think they're missing that. I think what I worry about is that dynamic where what happens is it's a very simple dynamic, very easy to manage. When the debt cycle works, when debt and debt service payments rise relative to income, and then they squeeze out spending, and that becomes a problem. And they worry, and they also happen when the supply of the bonds is high relative to the demand. Right now, for example, there's a lot of holding of bonds, one man's debts or another man's assets. And if they don't have a high enough return, so what we get is the issue in terms of that supply.
Could we see a
demand.
meltdown?
I don't think we're going to see a meltdown. I think a meltdown, I think you almost could see it melt up. In other words, when you have devaluations, anyway, the capital, what's happening to the capital supply demand as it relates to money is the big story that is not enough attention, particularly if you cross that line like military action in Greenland would change in important ways the demand for those assets. Because you could look at those holding those assets.
So interesting. Ray, I could talk to you forever, but we don't have enough time. We'll have to do it again very soon. Ray Dalio, founder of Bridgewater Associates. Guy, I'm going to send it back to you in London. And of course, we'll have plenty more interviews throughout the day here in Davos.
Looking forward to them all. The latest Secretary General is coming up. Frank, great stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Let's pick up on what Ray was talking about. What is happening in the debt markets, the perception of value and different debts around the world. UK gilts are certainly on the move this morning. This on the back of some better borrowing data, certainly some significantly borrowing data, better borrowing data. Gilts are outperforming quite significantly in Europe this morning on the back of that. 10-year 4.426 right now, down by three basis points.
Yeah, and you wonder if the move this morning is exaggerated a little by the fact that we've been so concerned about the long end earlier on this week because of the Japanese story, but just broadly across developed markets.
It's good news for the Chancellor, obviously, on the ground in Davos in trying to pitch the UK as a place of stability. And she's also been making the case that there's probably less likelihood she needs to raise taxes further from here. This is a step in the right direction. The lowest December borrowing since 2003. We see if that stays and holds, of course.
They're calling it the Davos deal, the deal that was done yesterday that de-escalated this Greenland situation. It looks like at the center of that story was the NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte. He is going to be joining us next. Really looking forward to this conversation. This is Bloomberg.
This is a 15, 16 grams tuna. Then sushi rice is still a little bit warm. So take one, like a very, don't make it too tight. So from now, and very light, like a ball. Put wasabi in the middle. Then my process 1, 2, 6. 1. This is putting the between the legs air. Then make the 4 fingers curl. Make sushi shape. Then touch this. 2. Then turn. Now these 2 fingers, top of the bottom, make the sushi shape more beautiful. 3. Then, I'm not, looks like pushing, not pushing. 3, 4, turn, same way, 5, and 6. So this is 1, 2, 6.
From the beating heart of global finance, economics, and politics, and wherever newsmakers are moving markets, Bloomberg brings you conversations that allow for deep discussions and important insights. What do you think the future is for inflation? Is this new normal? Are markets too optimistic? How do you worry about the things that are outside your control? How does the current fighting completely stop? I'm Francine Lacroix, and this is The Pulse, every weekday only on Bloomberg.
The Middle East and Africa regions are home to some of the biggest deals and fastest growth in the world. Vibrant resources and high-yield investment opportunities abound. I'm Jemana Versace. Join me on Bloomberg Horizon's Middle East and Africa for the stories, newsmakers, and insights shaping the decisions of traders across this exciting region.
You had heightened levels of volatility.
There's still room to maneuver.
Reduce the opportunities.
It allows you to increase significantly your net income.
Every trading day only on Bloomberg.
We're at the epicenter of a global realignment on a scale not seen for decades. At the intersection between markets, economics, and geopolitics, a forum for sophisticated conversation. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Happy Thursday. This is the opening trade. We are 30 minutes into today's session. 2 key catalysts for these equity markets then. The tariff retreat from President Trump and a renewed AI catalyst. You're seeing gains across the benchmark in Europe of more than 1%. Autos doing very well. Luxury doing very well. The DAX then gaining 1.3%. Over in France, the CAC adding 100 points despite the downside coming through from names like Ubisoft in the gaming space. Here in the UK, FTSE 100 lifted by 74 points, up 0.7%. Guy.
Okay, let's deconstruct the taco, see what's going on in terms of the internals. 547 stocks are up, 49 are down. Yeah, I think we're risk on this morning in terms of what we're seeing in these markets. Huge swing to one side of the boat, and that is the upside of the boat. In terms of the volume, it is big. 35 is the number, so we are definitely on the front foot when it comes to what is happening with these markets. Let's talk about what is leading that story. Chips are up. Tom was mentioning what is happening there. You've got the comments from the NVIDIA CEO. You've got the OpenAI story boosting that space. ASML was up in the back end of yesterday's session. The pharmaceutical stocks are doing very well on the back of the fact that they've got the tariff withdrawal story. They've been hit quite hard this week. You could put a car sector in there, a stock in there from that sector, or you could put a luxury name in there. LVMH is up by 1.5%. So you've got tech and you've got taco driving these markets to the upside this morning. Beasley is rejecting the Zurich offer. That stock is down by 2.5%. Remember, it rallied massively last week. I think the market, if you look at the risk arb on this one, maybe signaling it's not a big move to the downside, that actually this trade could still be on. We'll watch. The defense names are certainly under significant pressure, but the standout story on the downside, as we see gains being withdrawn, is Ubisoft. That stock, Anna, is down by 33% right now.
Yeah, certainly one of the big movers on the day. Let's get an update on some of the other stories we're covering for you this morning. The UK government borrowing fell more than expected in December, helping Chancellor Rachel Reeves in her bid to bring the public finances under control. The Office for National Statistics said spending exceeded tax revenue by £11.6 billion, the lowest December borrowing since 2003. Vladimir Putin says he could give $1 billion to Donald Trump's Board of Peace using assets that are currently frozen in the United States. This as Special Envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner prepare to meet the Russian leader in Moscow. Putin added that the remaining funds from the frozen assets held in the US could be used to rebuild Ukraine after a peace treaty is concluded. And President Donald Trump said he would refrain from imposing tariffs on goods from European nations opposing his effort to take possession of Greenland. Trump cited a, quote, framework of a future deal he said was reached regarding the island. Meanwhile, this morning, Denmark's Prime Minister said NATO talks with Trump did not cover sovereignty of Greenland. So still, Tom, a lot we do not know about the potential for a framework, about what this framework looks like, that has been, it seems, discussed, presented by NATO.
There has been some reporting from Axios from the New York Times suggesting that maybe part of this will be giving the US sovereignty around their bases in Greenland and emulating what the UK arrangement is with Cyprus, where we have British bases in Cyprus. Those British bases are technically UK sovereign. But the Danish Prime Minister coming out and saying that what they heard from their colleagues was that the sovereignty would be intact in terms of Danish sovereignty over Greenland, that they are ready to negotiate on defence, on the military, they're ready to negotiate on raw materials as well and rare earths. The sovereignty question is key. And to your point, we're waiting for the details.
Yeah, absolutely waiting for the details. Does make you wonder where this story has travelled in a week, because at the back end of last week, the Danes were saying, we're very happy to talk about all kinds of use of the land, and that wasn't enough for the United States. Now we hear from the president he's got everything he wants, but we hear conflicting conversations with the Danes. So we still don't understand a lot about what's happening here. And interesting, you see that reflected, that journey, that sort of round trip being reflected in markets of all kinds. We were looking at measures of risk around European credit, for example, really spiking at the beginning of this week and now dropping back right down.
Taco, it just once again, we're in a situation where it seems like we've seen a huge turnaround. The FT is talking about Europeans being flummoxed. I can understand why a lot of people are flummoxed by this. But as you say, the details matter. We need to find out more.
Arguably, the person at the centre of that turnaround, alongside the president, of course, was the NATO Secretary General. Let's bring in right now John Micklethwaite, Bloomberg's editor-in-chief, standing by with Mark Rutte. John.
Thank you very much. Indeed, joining me is Mark Rutte, Secretary General of NATO. Morning. Let's begin with that topic of Greenland. You know, what exactly happened in that room? I've known you a long time. Nobody doubts your powers of persuasion. But we all saw Donald Trump on the podium saying that he wanted that big, beautiful block of ice. Goes into a room with you and he says he has a framework for a deal. What did you do?
President Trump has been clear from when he was in office, Trump 45, also when he came back into office, Trump 47, that when it comes to the protection of the Arctic, with a priority on Greenland, we have to spend more energy, more time, more focus on this, because we know the sea lanes are opening up. The Chinese and the Russians are more and more active. So what we discussed last night, how in a practical sense we can get this done. And we agreed on these two tracks. One is the 7 countries in the High North, including the United States, working together to protect against any adversary. So that will be something where NATO is heavily involved. And then when it comes to Greenland specifically, continuing the discussions they started last week. The Danish delegation, Secretary Rubio, Vice President Vance in Washington, to continue that discussion. Also to make sure that when it comes to Greenland specifically, their economy, their military situation, Russia and China will never get access.
And the Danes and sovereignty, is that all assured?
We didn't discuss at all about that issue, so we discussed how can we protect Greenland, how can we protect the wider Arctic region. And again, I think President Trump was the one who reinvigorated NATO at the summit in The Hague with the famous 5%. I think we can be thankful for the fact that he again has been able to take leadership on this issue. How can we collectively protect the Arctic?
The latest rumours out there that it will be involve sort of bigger bases, longer leases, but not actually changing sovereignty, and the idea of far more American troops. Is that the sort of basis of it?
We didn't go into those details at all. We know that the Danes are completely open to having more American presence in Greenland, and Greenland is open to that. And I think it is good that these discussions take place with the 3 of them, because at the end I cannot negotiate on behalf of anyone. I was listening to a lot of people. I think there is a landing ground here, but in the end, of course, now we have to make it happen.
Do you think this is the week when Europe finally discovered its backbone?
Well, I think this is the week where collectively, one, we decided to focus on this important topic under President Trump's leadership, and second, the week where we continue to focus on Ukraine, because I think that's still the main issue at the table, to make sure that Ukraine sustains in the fight.
in Trump's speech, there seemed to be a degree of linkage between the two. We're backing you in Ukraine, I want Greenland. Do you think that's a healthy...
Yeah, I never comment on speeches of leaders. What I do is look at the practical...
Very lucky in this case.
But I look at the practical stuff. And President Trump has been clear from day one in office, as he was already in his previous presidential term. And I spoke with him then when I was Prime Minister of the Netherlands. We had many meetings, and I know he is really worried about this thing of the Russians and China, and he's right there, getting more access to the Arctic. So I think next to saving NATO, he is now clearly taking the lead on making sure the Arctic stays safe.
And on Ukraine, what is your assessment of what's happening on the front there? Because there seem to be two very clear things. One European leader saying, look, Ukraine is really in trouble. Others saying, look, Ukraine is doing a bit better on the battlefield.
I think what you see is that the front line is not moving in the right direction. It is moving westwards, not eastwards. At the same time, it is extremely slow. The Russians are making very incremental gains, so not huge, very small gains, against huge losses. They are now losing 1,000 people a day in December, so 30,000 over the months. I'm not talking about seriously wounded, really dead. It's terrible, the losses they are experiencing at the moment. And of course also on the Ukrainian side we see losses, but not to that extent. And so the Ukrainians are extremely courageous in defending the front line, but again it is slowly not moving in the right direction. And I think the peace process is really crucial here under leadership of President Trump again, but also with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, Marco Rubio. And I think the security guarantees are now in a good place, almost nailed. We are close to a deal, I think, on reconstruction. And now this sensitive issue of territory also has to be solved.
Just one thing on that. Front line, agreed, Ukraine is doing quite well. But back behind that front line, you've got people, it's freezing. There seems to be problems with the politics in Ukraine. Is that where the weakness of Ukraine is at the moment?
I would not say the weakness, but it shows you the Russian brutality and that they are willing to attack innocent civilians and civilian infrastructure, that people are now in conditions of minus 20 degrees are living without heating, without water in Kiev and Kharkiv and other cities, in smaller villages. And that means that I ask my European colleagues, please keep your eyes on this ball. The Americans are willing to provide Ukraine with the interceptors, the military gear they need, paid for by the Europeans and the Canadians. We have to keep that flow going. We have to make sure that we dig deep into our own European stockpiles when it comes to interceptors, to make sure that these fantastically courageous Ukrainian military can sustain in that fight.
Do you think in the peace talks that issue of where the front line has been sort of solved? Putin wanted all the Donbass. Many people point out that the Ukrainian line where it is at the moment is actually protecting the road to Kiev. So militarily you'd not want to give it away. Do you think that is now set in stone, and Trump has come around to seeing that?
Ultimately, it is up to Ukraine, of course, to decide what type of agreement they can do on territory. That's up to Ukraine. Yeah. But what I know is that for President Zelensky to really fully get his mind around that issue, he needs to know that we have security guarantees in place which will prevent the Russians from ever attacking again. The good news is that under French and UK leadership, this coalition of the willing came together. Then the American president said, I will help with backstop, with other unique US capabilities to make sure, building on the Ukrainian armed forces, 800,000 in size potentially, going forward. And that provides a package of security guarantees where the Ukrainian people know now and in the future, Putin will know, if I try again, the reaction will be devastating.
Is it one of the problems, again, another European leader, and that you hear this repeatedly from your erstwhile peers, is that Trump always comes back to the same thing, that Zelensky is the blockage, not Putin?
I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair, because he has always, also in many interviews, been very critical about Putin. I think he wants this done. He wants to end the meat grinder, and I'm with him on this. And he is the one who was breaking the deadlock with Putin in February, the first phone call. Only he could do this. He is the leader of the free world. He is the only man who was able to do that, to break the deadlock, and now the Europeans are helping. We are doing this together, Europeans stepping up again. We did it at the NATO summit with suspending, now when it comes to Ukraine. But I think in the end, Zelensky absolutely wants to do a deal. The question now is, of course, to Putin. Is he willing to do a deal? And that's being tested at the moment.
When you step back from this week, I know you're right in the hurly-burly at the moment, going here, there, trying to keep people together. And as I said, you've got a lot of credit for what happened in that room. But you look at
credit
NATO...
should be with President Trump, and I really mean this, because it was his vision to protect the Arctic, and I think yesterday we found a path forward to collectively do that.
But on NATO, as Mark Carney said yesterday, there is a rupture at the moment. You are head of NATO, that is the North Atlantic Treaty. I've heard more fury from European leaders this week than I think I have ever before in terms of America.
I would say to
Do
my
you
European
worry
colleagues,
about the long-term consequences of that?
And I would say to my European colleagues, focus on implementing the agreements in The Hague. Build your defense industries, get the spending done, get your men and women in uniform. The numbers of those men and women in uniform, getting them ramped up is crucial. I mean, Germany is leading the way here, spending 90 billion more in 2029 than they did in 2021. So that's fantastic. Opening factories all over the place, but still overall as NATO, including the US, our defense industrial base is still too small and we need to ramp that up. So I think to my European colleagues, focus on really on the ball. And the ball is Ukraine. The ball is the implementation of the The Hague Summit conclusions. And then when you have time after dinner, we can still gossip and talk, but it is about implementing the real decisions.
On that issue, that thing of Ukraine, Ukraine is still, in your mind, the big test. That is the bigger issue rather than Greenland and everything that is happening now.
Yeah, in the end, of course, that's overriding. And when you look at Greenland and the Arctic, it's about Russia and China. When you look at about Ukraine, it is also about Russia. And how do we protect ourselves against Russia? And Ukraine, of course, it is crucial that they sustain in that fight and that we get Ukraine to a sustainable outcome. And this is exactly what President Trump and his team, but also many Europeans supporting him in this, are working towards.
Mark Rutte, Secretary General of NATO, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We wish you all luck.
Thank you
very much. Back to the studio.
John, thank you very much indeed, with one of the most consequential, if not the most consequential interviews of the day. Bloomberg's editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite, with the NATO Secretary-General, of course, Mark Rutte. Meanwhile, a new poll suggests British business leaders want the Labour Party to keep Keir Starmer as Prime Minister, but many are open to backing Reform UK at the next election. Let's go back to Davos, where Bloomberg's Stephanie Flanders is with the party's leader, Nigel Farage. Let's listen in.
For example, you can now get benefits if you suffer from mild anxiety. Well, I have mild anxiety every morning. I mean, we've just reached a ridiculous level with all of this, and it can't go on. It just can't go on. We're looking at a benefits bill of 300 billion by 2030, something like that. So it can't go on. And look, of course, I'm there to challenge all of these things. And what I will do over the course of this year, I mean, bear in mind, I've only been back in politics 18 months. I escaped, I got out over the wall, but I'm back again. I've had 18 months to try and build a political party, a structure from nothing. So effectively, I'm the CEO of Reform, and we build departments, and they give their weekly or daily reports into me, and we're growing. The next big stage of my development will be that this time next year, sitting here on the Bloomberg panel with you, won't be me, because there will be a team of people appointed to take all of those jobs. And that's the next, that is the next big stage of the development. So, perhaps the criticism that could be leveled fairly against me, there were lots leveled unfairly against me, but the fairly against me is that, I've never been in frontline government, and it's a one-man band. So at the minute, I'm asked to talk about economic policy, foreign policy, law and order, borders, everything. And so it's now about broadening the team, putting different people in position, and then formulating firmer policies than we have. But we have laid out already some proposed bills, economic bills, the concept of the Britannia card to try and bring high taxpayers back to Britain, the digital markets, digital assets and crypto bill. So I think we are showing a way forward.
One other, we'll get onto the foreign policy in a minute, but there were just a couple of other domestic things. I mean, obviously, along with the welfare bill, and a big part of the increase in that half of spending is the triple lock. And you've suggested that would be up for discussion. Do you think it's affordable to continue that?
Everything's up for discussion. I mean, I think my main target in terms of cuts is excessive welfare spending. I get the logic of the argument over triple lock. It's something we'll come to over time.
The argument that it's too expensive.
The argument that it's too dear.
And also the generational issues.
Yeah, well, you can't, I mean, you know, you can't blame young people for being pretty cheesed off in Britain because they can't even aspire to have the things their parents had or their grandparents had. And that is a real, real problem. And, you know, one of the huge problems here, of course, is the lunacy of saying we want to send 50% to university. Something that Blair introduced, supported by the lapdog Tories. And now we have, you know, loads of kids who've been disadvantaged by going to university and others who are now paying marginal tax rates because of the extra 9% on everything they're earning. I mean, it's virtually usury, frankly, the way it's been done, forcing them abroad. And that's one of the areas with young people that really is making young people unhappy. It's also leading, and by the way, I'm not against university, I'm just against university for 50%. And a lot of those very bright graduates that come out of university that could be a huge economic benefit to Britain, just look at their tax bill after the first year and decide I'm going to go and live somewhere else in the world. So all of those things we've got to think about too.
You've got a lot of people in local government. I mean, one of the areas that certainly economists think probably doesn't work very well is council tax. And you've now got reform running around a dozen local governments. Is that something that, I mean, they all wanted to cut council tax. Lots of them are having to increase.
No, not true, not true, not true, not true.
Several of them said that, committed to it.
Not true. No, it's not true. Urban myth. I spent the whole of April travelling around the country. I never once promised we could cut council tax.
They weren't voting for you. They were voting for these councillors who did say they would cut it.
Well, you can believe that if you want to.
Well, they're the ones who are now stuck running it, having made these promises.
I think you'll find increasingly in British politics, at all levels of election, people either vote for or against the leaders of the main parties. We've sort of almost got a quasi-presidential system. Here's the point. We campaigned saying local government had serious debt issues and that we would trim expenditure. And we have already cut hundreds of millions of pounds of spending. But the debt burden around the necks is huge. If you look at our council tax increases, by the way, they're lower than the other areas run by the other parties.
Quite a few of them are the maximum amount. But anyway, I suspect
they
this
are lower.
Audience,
No, I'm going to repeat.
I care about council tax.
I'm sorry. The reform council tax rises taken across the 12 are lower
over average,
over the average than the other parties.
So you mentioned Brexit. You mentioned that we should have made more of an opportunity out of Brexit.
We should have done it immediately.
We've talked about the end of, that globalism has certainly, changed, and we are seeing a new kind of global order. I haven't heard you say, what is Britain's role in this new global order? How do you see, when you think the debates this week, how do you think about your foreign policy?
Number one, we have amazing advantages. Being outside of the European Union leaves us free in terms of trade policy. Ironically, the super Remainer Starmer boasts at the dispatch box now about the fact we've got an independent trade policy and we're able to do things. And I think in terms of being a bridge between Europe and America, we're in a powerful position. I just think we've underutilized the amazing advantages we have across the rest of the world. We turned our backs on India, we turned our backs on the Commonwealth countries in the 70s. We decided that Europe was our future. That became the sort of foreign office and political priority over decades. And we've turned our backs on large parts of the world where there is still a remarkable relationship between those former colonies and ourselves. So we need to think more globally in every way.
Prime Ministers, China's the obvious country that there's been a big debate about. Prime Minister's going to visit, I think it's the first prime ministerial visit for the UK in 8 years. Would you go to China? How would you think about the relationship with China?
Well, I don't believe our relationship with China is very good. I think this government is utterly craven in the way that it gives into China at every opportunity. It's a difficult problem because they've become so big, and to some extent we've become quite dependent upon them, and not the other way around if you think it through. So it's a massive, massive problem. But It's not a relationship we should trust, and we should be extremely cautious of them.
But what does that, I mean, if you're Prime Minister, what does that mean?
It means you don't allow them to build an embassy on the site of the historic Royal Mint, which could potentially threaten communications. I mean, I just can't believe it. I think Isaac Newton would be turning in his grave.
So there is, I like the fact that
Okay, you've been listening to Stephanie Flanders in conversation with the Reform UK leader, who of course is Nigel Farage. We're going to continue to monitor all the events that are happening in Davos, and we'll continue to bring you all the headlines that come from them. EU leaders are going to be meeting today, we understand, with the future of NATO, the issue of Greenland, very much top of the agenda as well. Let's listen to another conversation that is focused on what is happening here. We've got the German Chancellor delivering a special address at a panel in Davos. Let's listen in to Friedrich Merz.
We are reducing our economic and technological dependencies. And there is no room for isolationism and protectionism in this agenda. Instead, we are talking about strategically coordinated ties worldwide. Europe's trade ambitions are crystal clear. We want to be the alliance offering open markets and trade opportunities. We want to strengthen the rules for fair trade and level playing field. Europe must be the antithesis to state-sponsored, unfair trade practices, raw material protectionism, tech prohibition, and arbitrary tariffs. Tariffs, again, have to be replaced by rules, and those rules need to be respected by trading partners. On this, the EU is making great progress. Mercosur has been signed. And by the way, I deeply regret that the European Parliament has put another obstacle in our way yesterday. But rest assured, we will not be stopped. The Mercosur deal is fair and balanced. There is no alternative to it if we want to have higher growth in Europe. And most likely, this agreement will provisionally be put in place. In a few days' time, the President of the European Commission will travel to India to establish the principles of a free trade agreement between the subcontinent and the European Union. I was in India a week ago, and I have no doubt whatsoever that the era of great powers presents an opportunity for all of us and for all countries that favor regulations above arbitrary rule and see greater benefit in free trade than in protectionism and isolationism. And Europe is joining forces with new partners, as you do see in our efforts to finalize trade agreements with Mexico and Indonesia. In order to make best use of these new partnerships, we need to put our house in order at home. We are aware.
Okay, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz speaking then about Europe's role in this new global world order, talking about trade deals. And of course, it is the reversal, at least for now, on that tariff threat from President Trump that is feeding into the upside for these equity markets with a sprinkling of AI.
Yep, we're not done yet. Massive day coming up still. Yesterday felt like it was the big day in Davos. We're not quite done yet.
We are not. We are going to factor in some of that optimism around tech into the NASDAQ open, it looks like. 0.9% higher there. We've got data, to your point, to come out the US, PCE, GDP. We've got a meeting now between President Zelensky and President Trump. And the last one was okay. The one before that, not so good. So we'll have a look at how that one goes. Plenty more conversations coming up on Bloomberg TV, of course. The French Trade Minister will be with the team. We'll also be hearing from the Accenture CEO, the Darktrace CEO, Marsh CEO. So a mix of different business voices represented on the pulse to weigh up where we've got to so far on Davos. This is Bloomberg.
Africa, a region rife with potential for growth and opportunities, but not without its challenges. Bloomberg highlights the biggest stories, interviewing key players, and reporting on the issues impacting the region. Join us as we get to the heart of African business, politics, and economics, and ask the question, what's next? I'm Jennifer Zabasaja, and this is Next Africa. New episodes every month, only on Bloomberg.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute global news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Joanna Versace in Davos, Switzerland, and this is Bloomberg.
The countdown is on. Everything you need to get the edge at the end of the market day. Get ahead of tomorrow's trading with The Close. Weekdays on Bloomberg. Context changes everything. Welcome to the world of decentralized finance.
Why is it that NFTs have not recovered in the same way that, say, Bitcoin has?
Bloomberg is covering all things crypto.
It's a pretty spectacular story.
The people.
This is the future. This is the 21st century economy.
The transactions.
It snapped up nearly $1 billion of Bitcoin.
And the technology.
We need to build a digital Fort Knox. That gives people financial freedom, and that's a wonderful thing.
That's extraordinary.
We ride the wave that is Bitcoin.
Bloomberg Crypto, Tuesdays only on Bloomberg.
Astonishing day for US technology.
It's shaping the region's technology ecosystem.
Asia's biggest tech news and innovation.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories.
The economy has been doing well. That does not tell you what the future is going to be.
We are taking a step-by-step approach, a very systematic approach with India.
This is a time to put a little more defense into your portfolio.
Insight with Haslinda Amin, only on Bloomberg.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse, live from the World Economic Forum here in Davos. Now, there's been a collective sigh of relief from many world leaders after President Trump U-turned on his threat to impose tariffs on European countries opposed to his ambitions to take over Greenland. Now, the U.S. president also rode back the rhetoric and said he would not try to take the island by force. Expect reaction on all the big issues from speakers today at Davos, including Elon Musk, who was just added to the schedule. Also coming up, world leaders, including the Argentinian president and the Greek prime minister. Now, the U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, the NASDAQ chief executive, and the head of the IMF all join us. On today's show, we'll also get reaction from the French trade minister. Plus, we'll be speaking with chief executives of Accenture, Darktrace, and Marsh. Look, there's a lot of things going on, so let's go straight to the markets because we've had some pretty big moves over the last couple of days when it came to bond markets. European stocks rebounding again after the U.S. president seemed to abandon his tariff threats against Europe, easing concerns over a renewed trade war. Global semiconductor stocks, for example, on the up. This is after we had comments from the NVIDIA chief executive at Davos reinforcing enthusiasm for the AI trade. And then we're just, in the broader sense, we're seeing a risk appetite returning to equities. Now, later on, we're also expecting President Trump to speak at a signing ceremony here in Davos for his Board of Peace initiative, which has drawn resistance from fellow G7 leaders. But first, let's focus on Greenland. President Trump says a framework deal has been agreed, and therefore the 10% additional tariffs he threatened on European countries will not be imposed on February 1st. In his special address to delegates here in Davos, the U.S. president has said he would not try to take Greenland by force. Now, news of the agreement followed talks between Donald Trump and the NATO Secretary General here in Davos. Exact details of the deal have not been released, but the U.S. president spoke about it yesterday.
It looks like we have the concept of it. It gets everything we wanted, including especially real national security. Well, the deal is going to be put out pretty soon, and we'll see. It's right now a little bit in progress, but pretty far along. It gets us everything we needed to get. It's the ultimate long-term deal, and I think it puts everybody in a really good position, especially as it pertains to security and minerals and everything else.
Well, speaking to our editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite, within the last hour, Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, said he did not discuss Greenland's sovereignty with President Trump.
We didn't discuss at all about that issue, so we discussed how can we protect Greenland, how can we protect the wider Arctic region. And again, I think President Trump was the one who reinvigorated NATO at the summit in The Hague with the famous 5%. I think we can be thankful for the fact that he again has been able to take leadership on this issue. How can we collectively protect the Arctic?
Now, before the seeming climb down from President Trump, the French President Emmanuel Macron also gave one of the strongest pushbacks against the threat of more tariffs from the White House, calling for the EU to respond with its more powerful economic weapon if necessary. Let's discuss all of this with Nicolas Forissier, the French Trade Minister. Minister, thank you so much for joining us. What a week we've had here in Davos. So President Trump now ruled excessive force, dropped tariff threats, and called for immediate talks. Do you think this is really the beginning of de-escalation?
I hope so, because it's just incredible to imagine that a country member of NATO, founder of NATO, is running against NATO interests and the other countries of NATO. So I think this was perhaps a way to introduce a more resilient, more calm, more solid discussion, and I hope we will have it. This is the French position, at least, asking for, of course, protecting the Arctic, but doing it inside NATO and the alliance, which has been ruling our country and Europe also for years.
So is France and Europe ready to talk to President Trump about what the deal could look like?
I mean, we always are ready to talk. And we also have to know that France, as well as Europe in general, we have efforts to make to build a better, more solid Europe, more united, especially on the economical level. But of course, we're already ready to discuss. It's normal. It's a good way. Our position is to say, and President Macron said it very clearly here in Davos, we cannot accept what would be a rule of force. You know, we need to have normal discussions between great power countries, zones, and try to make as easy as possible the peace and resilient construction, if I may say so.
Minister, I mean, the European Parliament yesterday froze, right, the deal that was agreed between the US and the EU. Is this deal dead? Does it get revived? Like, what happens to trade?
Well, you have surprising decisions or surprising words, and of course we have responses. And it's normal that we use all the tools that are in our hands to just say no. We don't go in this escalation, as you were saying. We just agree to discuss and to try to find fair deals and to build something together rather than to destroy against each other's.
I mean, President Macron talked about using this anti-coercion instrument, right? This is powerful and it's the harshest. Is this the right way to deal with Donald Trump? I
mean, we have these tools in European institutions. We can anti-coercion tools. They exist. Instruments. They exist. If we need to use them, we will use them. They are there in case to be used. Okay, this is the only thing we said. But of course, the idea is not to use them, but just try to discuss and have, again, fair and solid discussions and deals.
But, Minister, is it fair to say that actually dealing with this President Trump, it's just a lot of psychology, right? This is not about instruments that get you. It's not really about balances. It's trying to get a fair negotiating position. So what kind of discussion works with the type of temperament that President Trump has?
Just be solid, just be calm, just be polite, and just say what we think and what we are. Europe is Europe, and we are not going to be weak. We're just trying to be what we are. And we know that also we have some efforts to do in the security defense questions, and Mr. Trump asked Europe to do it, and we are doing it. This is something that should be said. On the economical level, we have for trade to build some diversified and secured deals all over the world to diversify our exports, but also to secure our supply chain, especially in rare earths and critical metals and so on. And we have to build a Europe which is far more united, harmonizing its regulations more than ever, and I think it's the most important, building a strong financial unification so that we are able to invest massively in innovation industry, as was asking Mr. Draghi. And this is the strategy. And Mr. Trump and the Americans, I think they understand that. They are just trying to challenge us.
But, Minister, why is Europe not united in using these anti-coercion instruments? Is there a worry that actually it backfires?
Because we are building this little by little, and some members are not ready to do it and use it. Some others are saying just if these instruments exist, we use them. At least we say we are going to use them if necessary. So this is little by little being built. I mean, look what happened on the questions of security and defense since the beginning of the Ukraine war. It has changed massively. And of course, America wanted European countries to change, but we did it. So things are improving. I understand those who are saying that Europe is still very slow, but I really think that it's moving far more faster than you think.
Okay, so Champagne was threatened. Well, it was threatened at some point, right? Champagne, I mean, there were threats of even 200% tariffs.
Yeah. I learned yesterday that it was not 200 but 100, and now today I didn't hear anything about it. So this is not possible. This is not acceptable.
How sensitive are actually French exports of champagne and others to these threats?
Sensitive. They're very sensitive, and of course, the United States is a very important destination for wine and spirits, and especially champagne. This is the reason why, first, it's not acceptable to have this kind of weapon, taking some sectors which are very symbolic, important for us, as hostages. This is not acceptable, and if it was done, there would be some responses. But this is also the reason, and I'm saying this as a foreign trade minister, we have to, again, diversify. And Europe has to go on negotiating, discussing fair trade, win-win partnerships, securing and diversifying our exports, and especially for wine and spirits. And let's say Mercosur, for example, is very good for wine and spirits sector. It's dangerous for cattle raising and beef, for poultries and so on. And we have to protect those sectors. This is the French position, and this is what we did. But it's very good for wine and spirits. So we have to diversify, and this will calm everybody and everything.
And Minister, at the same time, so you're seeing China and China imports actually coming much more to Europe and France. So where's the threat there? Are there any industries that are threatened more than others because of these deflationary imports, actually?
I mean, the question of China is different. And the French position has been very clear also, and I think it's the European position. We cannot accept that China overcapacities are poured on the French and European market. This has to be regulated. And so this is why, for example, and France was very much pushing this, we made rebalance situation on electric vehicles, for example. We need to have a discussion with the Chinese where they understand that finally it would be better for them to invest, produce in Europe, and have a normal and balanced trade with us. And okay, we are ready to work with them. The same, we are asking them, for example, to buy our champagne, our wine and spirits, for example.
Do France and Germany share the same concerns about China?
No, of course, we don't have the same immediate interests. It's the difficulty in Europe that where is the good position between national and normal national interests? And for example, Germany's car industry is very important for them, and I understand that. Where is the good position between the national interest, for example, ours is agriculture, and the European interest, the common building of Europe? And this is very difficult, of course, but little by little I think we are improving. And Mr. Trump and this big tectonic movement, plaque tectonic, movement. We are facing today in international trade. This is obliging us to react and to change our mind and our the way we're acting.
It certainly focuses the mind. What's the right way of Europe? How quickly does Europe have to get away from China's dependency on rare earths?
As quickly as possible. This is what we are doing. France will chair the J7, for example, this year. Mm-hmm. This will be a subject I will put in the trade committee of J7, because we really have to diversify our supply chain in rare earth and critical metals. We have to invest in industrial sites. I mean, we are doing it in the south of France, for example, for heavy rare earth. We're going to, with the Japanese, it's a joint venture between Japanese and companies and French companies. We are going to produce 15% of the world's needs in
How
heavy.
Quickly? Because material,
it's
how
in
quickly?
2 years. It's being performed now. We are building the place. So, I mean, this, we have to, again, to diversify, to have partnerships with different countries. And this is, for example, what we're doing in Argentina, between France and Argentina. A lot of things are going on. We have to be very quick because for the moment, we still are dependent from China. That's right.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Minister, French Trade Minister there, Nicolas Forissier. Coming up, the NVIDIA chief executive gives another boost to the AI trade when speaking at Davos. We'll discuss how this technology is reshaping competitiveness with Julie Sweet, the chief executive of Accenture. That interview is coming up next, and this is Bloomberg.
U.S. jobs numbers are released. Bloomberg has the report under surveillance with crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed. Nobody covers Jobs Day like Bloomberg. Tune in to Bloomberg Business Week Daily.
We got to talk crypto.
From the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead.
What's the conversation around your company?
Bringing you insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy.
Planning very big things.
A new level of premium.
Plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens.
The floodgates of innovation are going to open up.
You can't fake passion. You either are or you aren't.
Bloomberg Business Week Daily, only on Bloomberg.
From the beating heart of global finance, economics, and politics, and wherever newsmakers are moving markets, Bloomberg brings you conversations that allow for deep discussions and important insights. What do you think the future is for inflation? Is this a new normal? Are markets too optimistic? How do you worry about the things that are outside your control? How does the current fighting completely stop? I'm Francine Lacroix, and this is The Pulse, every weekday only on Bloomberg.
From the world of politics to the world of business, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live 2 times a day, every trading day. Balance of Power at 1 and 5 Eastern, only on Bloomberg. This week, live from the Alpine Mountains of Switzerland, is the World Economic Forum annual meeting in Davos. Bloomberg Television brings you unmatched coverage and conversations with world leaders, business executives, and billionaires as they navigate responsible AI deployment, economic expansion, and geopolitical tensions. Tune in for daily coverage all week. Context changes everything.
Welcome back to The Pulse, everyone. We're live from Davos. Now, NVIDIA chief executive Jensen Huang is reinforcing investor excitement for the AI trade. While speaking to BlackRock's Larry Fink here in Davos, Huang said the infrastructure around AI will need trillions of dollars in additional investment over the coming years.
This is the largest infrastructure build out in human history. That's gonna create a lot of jobs, and it's wonderful that the jobs are related to tradecraft, and we're gonna have plumbers and electricians and construction and steel workers and network technicians and people who install and fit out the equipment, and all of these jobs. We're going to, in the United States, we're seeing quite a significant boom in this area. Salaries have gone up, nearly doubled. Yeah. And so we're talking about six-figure salaries for people who are building chip factories or computer factories.
Jensen Huang there, the NVIDIA chief executive, speaking to the co-chair of WEF, Larry Fink. Now, companies left, right, and center, of course, are racing to adopt AI technologies in an attempt to be more productive and more cost-efficient. As part of that drive, consulting firm Accenture says it's training its employees to be AI native. Well, I'm joined by Julie Sweet, the chief executive of Accenture. Thank you, as always, for giving us a little bit of your busy schedule, which I imagine this year was even busier than usual. First of all, how do you think, Julie, AI is actually reshaping competitiveness between the U.S., Europe, and Asia?
Well, Francine, thanks for having me. It really starts with how it's reshaping competitiveness in industries, right? So if you're a consumer-facing industry, you have to now be able to, have people buy within models, for example. It's a whole new channel. And so the basis of competition in industry is changing, and the same is therefore true among the countries. If your industries are not at the forefront, you're going to have an issue.
So who's adopting at pace and in the right way, and who's being left behind?
The U.S. companies today, and that's really data, has said that the U.S. has been ahead in the digital race. And because you need a digital foundation, the U.S.-based companies are ahead. But lots of global companies, including in Europe, we have lots of great global European companies who are very fast. It's not so much about is it U.S. or Europe. It comes down to if your data is not in the cloud, if you don't have a digital foundation, it's hard to go fast. And across the world in every geography, there are great companies who have been investing, and those who have not have to catch up there, along with all the other changes that you need to make.
Julie, how much of this is also about data centers? So it's a race to, does it make you more powerful? Does it give you a leg up if a data center is in your country? We're seeing a lot of wrangling on this.
Data centers are absolutely critical because that's the infrastructure of the country. And so that's exploding. In fact, we just bought another company to do data center consulting because of that. And you have to think about it long term. I think the mistake somehow some people are making is this isn't about the data center today. It's about a strategy. And that's what we're seeing countries doing. And we're helping countries do that, particularly as you think about sovereign AI and the need to have the data centers to support that. And I've been spending a lot of time right here in Davos on that topic.
You've also trained, hundreds of thousands of your staff to be AI tool native. What can companies and countries learn from your efforts?
Well, first of all, if leaders don't understand AI, they can't lead the company through the changes. In 3 years, you should be able to say, my company has different services, has different insights. That requires a depth of learning from leaders first, and then you have to bring everybody along the way. So leader-led learning is absolutely critical. It's also critical for regulators. In regulated industries, if regulators block the AI, they're not going to be able to scale and succeed. And so governments, the not-for-profits, and companies all need leader-led learning and then a strategy to bring all of our people along.
Can you give us a concrete example? When we go around speaking to a lot of chief executives, they understand it, but then it's always a struggle to kind of say, how do I actually put it for my workforce or for my citizens?
Well, one of my clients told me that, that until they had their 300 leaders touch keyboards, see what the AI could do, they couldn't get moving. That's a very tangible example. That's the first thing we did way back after November 2022. The most training was actually our top 50 leaders who actually got their hands dirty, right, understanding it. And that's what we mean by leader-led learning. And once you have that, it unlocks the possibilities of what does it really mean that it's going to change everything?
What's the biggest mistake from customers that you advise of what they're doing with AI, or not doing, actually?
The biggest mistake is thinking it's about AI. AI is a powerful tool. If you don't start with your business strategy and a business outcome, and that's a real problem. We've seen so many projects that are not in the same things that you measure. If it doesn't hit the P&L, it's really, if it's a productivity, then it's not going to have impact. So you have to start with your strategy, not it's an AI project.
What are some of the biggest questions that chief executives are asking you right now about this year, 2026?
Actually, there's been a big shift because we've had a lot of great examples of things scaling. So especially in the marketing space, pharmaceutical companies getting drugs in the hands of physicians faster because they can bring the marketing material faster is just one example. Field sales, et cetera. So now the real shift over the last year is, how do we think about this holistically? We're seeing value, real value, but we want to embed it everywhere. And how do you do that? And that comes to the talent. It comes to being willing to operate differently. And very importantly, it comes to a strategy that says, if I don't want to just do what I'm doing today better, I want to have breakthroughs. And those are the conversations that we're having.
Have you heard any regrets of, the way that some of them rolled out AI?
The biggest regret has been too many projects without the discipline of, is it going to be material enough? What is the business outcome? This thread around, it's not, AI is a tool, is what you're starting to hear. Yes, it's a really, really powerful tool, but we've never built businesses, won consumers, reimagined manufacturing just by the tool.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing we're talking a lot about is, how everyone's job will change and training, but what's the right way to support a worker that might be really afraid of AI, that, it material changes the work it does today?
Look, starting in 2019, we've been training all of our workers, whether you're in the mailroom or a strategist, on technology. Technology is a basic skill now, and once you start making that investment, people get less scared about their jobs because they know you're invested in making sure they can do the next choice, the next jobs. And we have a design choice. We believe you can design to have new entry-level jobs, but coming along with that is you need to be able to educate, and there's also a collaboration that has to happen with schools, with universities, but we're in early innings. We can make that design choice.
So what does that look like?
Well, the first thing it looks like when we're looking at Accenture, we're saying, well, some of our people can do things that maybe they think that is what the future should be.
How much distraction is there because of trade and tariffs?
This week has been quite a bit of distraction. I think we're all relieved at what came out yesterday. But at the same time, it's only been a distraction in the big conversation. I have had so many meetings with companies, and that's too bad, but let's make sure that we're winning regardless of the atmosphere. So it's been a distraction more in the media, but I will tell you, and CEOs are saying, we don't have tailwinds in the environment. We have to execute.
Julie, thank you so much, as always, for joining us. Julie Sweet there, the Chief Executive of Accenture. Coming up, with the number of cyber attacks on the rise, we'll also be joined by the Chief Executive of Darktrace. This, of course, is Davos 2026, and this is Bloomberg.
Rodriguez. And I'm Jason Kelly. And we're back with another season of The Deal.
With athletes and entrepreneurs who are changing the game on and off the field. Jerry Jones. Some good-looking trophies.
1-1 is 3 in sports, not 2. And it's because that 3 is imagination. That 3 is putting yourself in a way, having yourself hit the home run.
Erica Ayers-Badon.
I'm a high-energy board member. I'm very passionate. I have a lot of opinions.
Robin Arzone.
I want to light fires in people's lives, and that is still one of my core mandates for all of my businesses.
Justin Tuck.
I tell all of my friends that play in leagues now, make these relationships now while you're hot. Don't wait till you're the 12th year in and you're just hanging on.
Stay tuned. You won't want to miss it.
The Middle East and Africa regions are home to some of the biggest deals and fastest growth in the world. Vibrant resources and high-yield investment opportunities abound. I'm Jemana Versace. Join me on Bloomberg Horizon's Middle East and Africa for the stories, newsmakers, and insights shaping the decisions of traders across this exciting region.
You had heightened levels of volatility.
There's still room to maneuver.
Reduce the opportunities.
It allows you to increase significantly your net income.
Every trading day, only on Bloomberg.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade. Watch Bloomberg Tech. This is the Asia Trade.
This is Wall Street Week. Welcome to Balance of Power.
This is Bloomberg Television. Get your fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield around the world right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Welcome back to The Pulse, everyone, live from Davos. Now, geopolitics continues to dominate here. Cybersecurity, a key area of concern for international relations and the corporate world. Now, companies reporting of cybersecurity incidents to European regulators surged last year following a multi-year plateau. The law firm DLA Piper says the average number of data breaches reported to EU authorities rose by 22% last year. Well, with me now is Jill Popelka, the chief executive of Darktrace. Thank you for joining us. I mean, you're like the beacon of who we turn to understand exactly some of the cybersecurity threats. What's the landscape looking like today? Terrifying?
Oh, Francine, I'm not as terrified. Actually, this week has been very encouraging. We've had great leaders, not only from the cybersecurity space, but also from AI companies. And we're all talking about how to ensure that we have a secure future. How do we ensure that even as we are starting to proliferate these AI agents, and there's so many unknowns, that we can also get visibility and control and put some guardrails around those so that people are safe and innovating.
But so how is Darktrace adapting to stay ahead of some of these really personalized attacks, deep fakes, and also automated hacks?
Well, Francine, the great thing about Darktrace is that we started in 2013 with an incredible concept around this technology, which is if we understand what's normal within a business, we can protect it from what's not normal. And that's what Jack and the team in Cambridge are working on today. We continue to grow this R&D team, and they not only now protect networks, they protect email, cloud, OT, but we're also securing AI so that people truly can get visibility into their agents.
Can you give us an idea of how the threat is changing? I mean, it is more complicated, right?
It is. The threats are becoming more sophisticated. They're becoming more complex. And whereas before we might have thought about being attacker-centric and trying to predict what the attacker was going to do next, that's not what Darktrace has ever done, and it's definitely not what we can do moving forward, because we can't predict this high-velocity, high-threat landscape. We know that countries like Japan, for example, they used to have a natural barrier because their language was more complex and people couldn't quite get their, the cyber attackers couldn't get their heads around creating an attack in Japanese. But now AI can create those complex, highly sophisticated threats in any language around the world. And so, right, we're looking at a much higher velocity threat landscape.
So is AI and cybersecurity much more sophisticated than even 12 months ago?
Oh, of course. It's becoming more and more sophisticated. We have the most amazing minds in Cambridge, people who are linguistics majors, people who have majored in the classics, but now looking at how is this AI challenge for us? How do we protect the world against it?
So after Darktrace's acquisition by Thomas Bravo and the shift to operating privately, how has that changed your focus and investment strategy?
Darktrace was already changing, and so the transition into private equity ownership really wasn't that big a deal for us. We were continuing on our path of innovating and creating the latest and greatest products. We were also working on scaling our business. So we had become really a $700 million startup, And then we needed to ensure that our systems and our processes and our talent acquisition and all the different things that big companies do, that we were doing those really well also. I wanted to make sure, though, that as we applied process and as we created these foundational systems, we didn't take away the spirit of Darktrace, because that innovation is what keeps us ahead.
That's difficult, right? It goes to kind of the culture of the company, and it's difficult to put your finger on it, but if it works, it works.
That's right, and it so works at Darktrace.
Jill, talk to me a little bit about the debt load.
So, interesting topic, right? The debt load is something that we see as part of this program that we're running, right? I mean, I'm really focused day to day on executing, on operating the business. And so I'm not thinking about the debt load quite as much. Our partners at Thoma Bravo are thinking about that all the time and ensuring that we're in a healthy place, that we're in a healthy spot going forward. And as we continue to grow our revenue, we feel like we're in a great place.
So when you look at, again, cybersecurity kind of like ecosystem, when you look at partners, do you see others as like rivals or partners, or how does this landscape change as people are spending more and more money on cybersecurity and cyber threats?
Yeah, two different parts of that. First of all, customers are always working with partners, and so we are going completely partner-focused, ensuring that we are working with our partners to educate customers not only on the threats, but on which tools can be best to protect them from those threats. What's really been encouraging this week at Davos is that I've been talking to who you might think of as Darktrace's competitors, the CEOs of other cybersecurity companies. We meet in forums that allow us to really talk about how to solve this problem for the world. And I've been so encouraged because we work together. We talk about how our solutions are complementary, how we work together to protect the most important part of what humans are doing.
I mean, I think some of the most important and interesting sessions are also with some of the spy chiefs. Again, it's a world that not many people know about except through movies. Are the cyber threats coming from government agents or government entities, or what can you tell us about where the biggest threat is coming from?
You know, what's interesting is AI has democratized cyber attacks just like it's democratized so many other things.
That's a good
line.
line.
It doesn't really matter where it's coming from. From a Darktrace perspective, we're going to protect you from a nation-state actor, just like we're going to protect you from a Western teenager in his garage, having a heyday with AI that day. So it's not so much about being attacker-centric. What we do want to think about, though, is how we get every anomaly and how we ensure that we're protecting from those.
How are you using AI to actually see the anomalies?
We're using a multi-layered AI approach out in Cambridge. We have, again, some incredible minds that are working on how you use multi-layers of AI to really understand not just what's normal for your business, but also which of those things that are not normal are truly threats. So we can prioritize those and ensure that the SOC, the Security Operations Center at a company, can look at the most important things first.
Jill, so sometimes I get told that actually the most simple phishing, right, done cleverly, is the most dangerous.
It's true.
In cybersecurity.
It's true. Phishing and with deepfakes, today, actually this week, I've had an interesting conversation with CEOs around deepfakes. Apparently, all CEOs have experienced them. We don't talk about them very much. We're in safe forums, honestly, here. And so when you talk about a deep fake, I actually experienced one walking out of my first board meeting. And when I walked out, and the executives that I'd really just started to lead had a blank stare on their face. I asked what was wrong, and they said, "We've just gotten a voicemail from you." And it was asking for financial data and customer data. "Was that you?" I said, "No, I was in the board meeting." They said, "Of course." And so these were, astute executives. As I told that story, more and more CEOs said, "That happened to me early in my tenure as well." Clearly, it's a tactic that attackers are using to hit CEOs early in their tenure when they haven't established communication channels and haven't established the security proceedings that they normally would have.
And I've heard also, deep fake, of people wanting to put out, even countries or governments wanting to put out an endorsement or not, and their team actually back home saying, "Hold on, this is a deep fake." How sophisticated? Is there a point where we won't be able to tell deep fake from the truth?
Oh, I think we're already at that point. I think we're already at the point where deep fakes can be so good that it's very difficult to tell, especially if, you're a new employee at a company and you haven't heard often. And so it's a multi-layered cybersecurity approach, and humans are truly the most important line of defense.
Jill, thank you so much for your time. Jill Popelka, there, the chief executive of Darktrace. Now, the former UK Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says trust has been lost between the EU and the United States following the row over Greenland. The President Trump has withdrawn his threat of further tariffs on Europe after reaching what he called a framework deal on Greenland's future. Rishi Sunak, who's now a senior advisor to Goldman Sachs, told me EU-US relations have been damaged by this week's events.
It was welcome that we seem to have reached an agreement, or that we appear to have reached an agreement on Greenland yesterday, and Mark is to be commended for some skillful diplomacy. But Obviously, the process of getting to that agreement has clearly damaged trust amongst allies, long-standing allies with deep friendship and partnership. That's been the very unsettling thing about the last few days.
Is Prime Minister Starmer doing it the right way? We keep on hearing from people that maybe are closer to Donald Trump that if you show a bit of teeth, he backs away quicker.
We in the UK, of course, the United States is our closest and oldest ally in that regard. And I think it is important, to make sure that we remain aligned with the US where we can. But this was something which clearly was unacceptable. And the Prime Minister was right to say that it was unacceptable and be firm on that. And I think that the diplomacy over the last few days has, it appears, led us to a better place than we were a few days ago. But you're also not wrong. It is important when lines are crossed that countries are able to demonstrate that strength, that they will stand up for what they believe in, stand up for their values and their interests. And the world we're in, this new world order, requires a bit more hard power. Whether we like it or not, there's no point moaning about it. We have to adjust to that, and we have to have that hard power, invest in it, and then be prepared to use it to protect our values and our interests.
Do you think European leaders and business feel pushed around? And does it mean that actually the nature of the relationship just has, it has changed forever?
I think trust is an incredibly important commodity when it comes to geopolitics and relationships, and it's something that is built up over time. And the damage that we've seen to trust in the last few days is obviously very sad for someone who believes strongly in the transatlantic alliance. And the frustrating thing is, my colleagues in Europe have been engaging with the US, who were right to focus on Arctic security. Of course, that's an increasing concern that we all should be investing more in and paying more attention to. And the Europeans and the Danes were very open to the types of arrangements that we're now, that seem to be part of the deal. We could have got to that place without all of the drama of the last few days and the damage to trust that it's done, and people then feeling that they have been pushed around and bullied, which is obviously very damaging for long-term relations.
That was Rishi Sunak, the former UK Prime Minister, speaking to me a little bit earlier. Now, coming up, we discuss the escalating political tension and what it means for risk and insurance with John Doyle, the Chief Executive of Marsh. That's next, and this is Bloomberg.
Africa, a region rife with potential for growth and opportunities, but not without its challenges. Bloomberg highlights the biggest stories, interviewing key players, and reporting on the issues impacting the region. Join us as we get to the heart of African business, politics, and economics, and ask the question, what's next? I'm Jennifer Zabasaja, and this is Next Africa.
New episodes every month, only on Bloomberg.
Trading day is about to start.
And you're already looking for that edge.
The opening trade brings you everything you need to know as markets open across Europe.
I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Anna Edwards.
And I'm Tom McKenzie.
This is your opening trade.
Only on Bloomberg.
Welcome to the world of decentralized finance.
Why is it that NFTs have not recovered in the same way that, say, Bitcoin has?
Bloomberg is covering all things crypto.
It's a pretty spectacular story.
The people.
This is the future. This is the 21st century economy.
The transactions.
It snapped up nearly $1 billion of Bitcoin.
And the technology.
We need to build a digital Fort Knox.
That gives people financial freedom, and that's a wonderful thing.
That's extraordinary.
We ride the wave that is Bitcoin.
Bloomberg Crypto, Tuesdays only on Bloomberg.
Welcome back to The Pulse, everyone. I'm Francine Lacroix, and we're live from Davos. Now, the Trump administration has created a tense atmosphere here in Davos, even with the president saying that he would refrain from imposing tariffs on goods from European nations over the Greenland issue. Now, let's discuss these escalating tensions and actually what it means for risk and insurance products with John Doyle, the chief executive of Marsh. John, as always, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, we certainly started the year with a bang. There's Venezuela, concerns over Iran, now everything to do with Greenland. Does it change the type of products that people want in insurance?
Well, I think what needs to change is the mindset of business leaders all over the world. It's a heightened period of risk, uncertainty. You know, you mentioned some geopolitical events, but broadly speaking, it's geoeconomic confrontation. We're watching that unfold here. You know, you mentioned the tension and anxiety here in Davos over the course of the last several days, and so it requires a different way of thinking. Financing those risks at the end of the day is at the end of that thought process, and so we're working, though, very, very closely across all of our capability set to help businesses and try to invest with a level of confidence in this environment.
But, I mean, given there are more heightened, I guess, domestic tensions in the U.S., are there more insurance products to go with it? Or?
Well, we have products and capabilities and advisory work that we can help around civil commotion, social unrest, those kinds of products. And, of course, they're under greater demand at the moment. But again, it is, while it's an extraordinary moment in many, many ways, there are real opportunities for businesses too. And so, you know, I expected this week it to be broadly a discussion about geopolitics and AI, and that's really, you know, what I've experienced, at least.
I mean, on geopolitics and AI, and you do have a very large company with very almost different units. How does that change the caliber of what you want to invest in?
Yeah, I mean, for us, some of this risk and uncertainty is a real opportunity for our business in trying to help businesses thrive through all of this extraordinary environment. And so it's an opportunity for bringing our capabilities together. We've got big assets and capabilities in risk, but also in strategy. And so it's risk and opportunity. And I think AI is a great example of big risk and opportunity. I know you were talking about cyber risk earlier today. Heightened cyber risk from AI, I don't think gets quite enough attention. But of course, there's job dislocation, economic disruption, business model disruption that comes with AI. But at the same time, extraordinary opportunities to reinvent the way you do work. And I'm excited about that for our company, but also we're helping companies think through how to deploy these technologies in their workplaces.
So how do you use AI? I mean, is it used differently in terms of modeling or communication with employees? And I imagine, again, it's different for every unit.
We've probably made more progress in our company with productivity tools, but we're also putting an AI lens on all the analytics. So all the different models that we've developed, many of them around risk or in investments, but putting an AI lens on that, given our scale, gives us a great opportunity to serve our clients better. And a big part of my focus this year will be how can we drive more revenue growth from AI-generated models.
How does what happened in Venezuela impact some of the insurance products that you offer in that space?
Well, I would say we have 100 people in Caracas, so. When those events unfolded, very early in the year, wanted to make sure our people were safe. But I think, an example of the way business leaders need to think, you need to immediately look at your assets around the Caribbean, around Latin America, and see whether or not there's broader contagion or risks like that. And so for us, we did scenario planning, and we did a lot of work for our clients in the same way.
What about Greenland? Have more mining companies reached out to assess whether they can be protected more or looking at risk differently?
I think Greenland is, and as it relates to rare earths and minerals, an example of maybe an extreme example, but of some of the conversations that have been happening more over the course of the last couple of years all over the world. And so I think many of those businesses, have developed a framework to think about some of the opportunities and challenges in this geopolitical environment. But again, it's working with our clients, trying to find ways to invest with a level of confidence.
So I'm sure how many clients have you met in Davos?
Oh, dozens.
And what are they asking you?
Yeah, they're asking us for help. How do we navigate this risk? What kind of risk framework can we put in place? How can we be more agile? And really, I've heard from a lot of world leaders as well during the course of the week, and you're seeing some parallels where diversification is a major theme. But also, again, scenario planning, doing more tabletop exercises. We have an excellent risk framework within inside of our company, and we provide a lot of advice to other businesses that way. But making sure you're aware of supply chain risks, broader geopolitical risk, and how that may impact your business is really important.
Are you expecting more shocks? I mean, risk has changed, right? If you'd asked me like January 1st, or we spoke to loads of economists and said, the risk of tariffs is behind us. And then it wasn't at all.
Right, right. I will say, a lot has happened in the last year, for sure. And, again, geoeconomic confrontation being this kind of, to me, top risk and heightened risk that business and world leaders are confronting at the same time. But I will say, and I think the last couple of weeks are a good example. Markets are, I think on a relative basis, have been calm and really kind of trying to think through, okay, where does this all head? So I think we all recognize, certainly the U.S. administration's operating with a different playbook. That's going to create some disruption in the short term, maybe medium or long term, but being patient and being thoughtful about managing through that. And I'm seeing businesses begin to understand the environment better and making decisions and investing through it.
John, thank you so much for joining us. John Doyle there, the Chief Executive of Marsh. Now, within the last hour, the NATO Secretary General also told us that he did not discuss the future sovereignty of Greenland when he met President Trump. The U.S. President says a framework deal for Greenland's future has been agreed. He spoke to our editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite. Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, revealed what happened when the two men met.
President Trump has been clear from when he was in office, Trump 45, also when he came back into office, Trump 47, that when it comes to the protection of the Arctic, with a priority on Greenland, we have to spend more energy, more time, more focus on this, because we know the sea lanes are opening up. The Chinese and the Russians are more and more active. So what we discussed last night, how in a practical sense we can get this done, and we agreed on these two tracks. One is the 7 countries in the High North, including the United States, working together to protect against any adversary. So that will be something where NATO is heavily involved. And then when it comes to Greenland specifically, continuing the discussions they started last week. The Danish delegation, Secretary Rubio, Vice President Vance in Washington, to continue that discussion. Also to make sure that when it comes to Greenland specifically, their economy, their military situation, Russia and China will never get access.
And the Danes and sovereignty, is that all assured?
We didn't discuss at all about that issue, so we discussed how can we protect Greenland, how can we protect the wider Arctic region. And again, I think President Trump was the one who reinvigorated NATO at the summit in The Hague with the famous 5%. I think we can be thankful for the fact that he again has been able to take leadership on this issue. How can we collectively protect the Arctic?
The latest rumours out there that it will be involve sort of bigger bases, longer leases, but not actually changing sovereignty, and the idea of far more American troops. Is that the sort of basis of it?
We didn't go into those details at all. We know that the Danes are completely open to having more American presence in Greenland, and Greenland is open to that. And I think it is good that these discussions take place with the 3 of them, because at the end I cannot negotiate on behalf of anyone. I was listening to a lot of people. I think there is a landing ground here, but in the end, of course, now we have to make it happen.
Well, that was the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte speaking to our editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite. Now, the U.S. President due to take part in the Board of Peace signing ceremony here in Davos. With us now is Bloomberg's Jumana Versace, of course, who covers the Middle East. Jumana, this is, I mean, there were so many questions about whether leaders would show up or not show up. Just explain to us what exactly this board is.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a very good question, Fran, because I think there are a lot of people asking exactly what the board is going to entail. Essentially, it's an oversight committee. This is phase 2 of the bigger plan for Gaza that they agreed a couple of months ago. Phase 1, obviously, was about the cessation of hostilities, the return of hostages in exchange for prisoners. Now the idea is to move on to phase 2. Now, only one element of it is this so-called Board of Peace. And there's been a lot of controversy around it, Francine.
Yeah, I'll say.
There has been a lot of controversy, but for many reasons. One of them is because the charter that was released, and many reporters have been really focused on this point, doesn't actually include a reference to Gaza. Their ambitions seem to be broader than just the oversight of what is happening in Gaza, and perhaps be a competing mechanism to the United Nations. So many countries are taking umbrage to that.
I mean, President Putin was invited to join this. That was controversial, and President Trump was asking for money, a lot of money to join the board.
Yes, so those are a couple of other elements that were leaked. Actually, yesterday, President Trump confirmed that Putin has accepted the invitation. On the sum of money, $1 billion apparently is the number that's being floated around in order for these members on the Board of Peace to maintain a permanent position, because initially they sign up for a 3-year role, and if they want to extend it, make it permanent, they'd have to cough up the money, which is sort of a pay-to-play mechanism. Unclear if anyone is really going to be willing to cough up the money. And then the other thing that people are really questioning is the fact that Trump himself is the ultimate chair, so he has ultimate oversight authority over this board. And even when he's no longer acting U.S. president, there's nothing in the charter to suggest that he will no longer be in that role. So I think a lot of the Europeans are questioning that, and they've not really jumped in to signing onto it. Middle East countries have.
Yeah, so it's our understanding, actually, no G7 leader, apart from the U.S., right, has signed up to this,
so
but you
far.
have 20 heads of states.
Yes, so far. And what you are hearing is the likes of Maloney, for example, yesterday saying it's not totally out of the question, but there needs to be some discussion about certain elements of what exactly the mandate of this Board of Peace is going to entail. But the signing ceremony is going to happen shortly, and we are waiting for President Trump to arrive right here to the Congress Center. Again, people are lining up, similarly how they did yesterday, to see who exactly is going to be signing on to this. Apparently, 50 invitations have been sent out to heads of state. From what we understand, about 20 of them have accepted and are going to be present, not necessarily the heads of state themselves, but representatives from those countries.
And they're paying?
At this point, no, because the first 3 years are free, I guess.
Okay.
But, actually, it's interesting on that point, Francine. In the last 24 hours, I think the U.S. administration is trying to distance themselves from, one, that fee, and two, the fact that this Board of Peace is going to be competing with the United Nations and really refocus the mandate on Gaza specifically.
I mean, what does it mean for Gaza? It doesn't seem actually to be very helpful for the population there.
So it's an interesting structure, because the way ultimately it's going to work is an oversight body. They're not going to deal with the day-to-day. This is not about governance. It's just simply an international oversight body. A Bulgarian diplomat was appointed as the representative to the Board of Peace, and he will be overseeing a transitional technocratic governance committee that is put together, composed of Palestinians, all with technocrat backgrounds. And those are the people that should be, in theory, tasked with the day-to-day administration, with the oversight of the board, and that representative as well. Again, details still thin, but at this point, what people will say, especially some of the leaders in the region, that we are seeing for the first time an internationalization of this conflict. There is international attention, there's buy-in from many of these leaders into what happens. And interestingly enough, despite a lot of criticism at the beginning, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu also has accepted to be part of the board.
Yeah, which must be controversial.
Well, in itself, I mean, there's a lot of controversy, but it's important to have, obviously, buy-in from Israel, too. I mean, they are important. They are an integral part of this process if you want to think about stability in the region.
Joanna, I mean, yesterday I was in the room where President Trump spoke. He took a long time to speak about other things. Are we expecting the same today? We're expecting some kind of press conference.
Yes, so there
He could be derailed. He could talk about Greenland and other things as well.
That's correct. I mean, you never know with these. And it's interesting, yesterday during his speech, he actually didn't mention the Middle East that much, just a passing reference. I think he was asked about Hamas in the Q&A, and he said, absolutely, this phase, the disarmament has to happen. Obviously, that is one of the key pillars of phase 2. But the focus now will be on this major milestone, building on the success from Sharm el-Sheikh. This is the signing ceremony. It's obviously very symbolic. He will be speaking about that. And then from what we understand, he will have senior members of the administration with him, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Jared Kushner should be there as well, Steve Witkoff. all of the big players who helped get this across the line, in addition to the Bulgarian High Representative to the board that I just mentioned to you too, and perhaps he'll give some remarks as well.
I mean, is this a flattery project for President Trump? Is this how it's being discussed? I imagine that if you're a high representative or a country right now, you're thinking, would we flatter to hope to get something from this? Or do you actually believe in the process?
I think this is the pathway. People see it as a pathway, not necessarily a flattery, a moment of flattery. I think, you know, if you look at this conflict has been raging for decades now. And I think people really do feel that perhaps this is the first time that, again, you have the internationalization of the conflict and you have the international community focused on really bringing about long-term stability. And so I think there are a lot of reservations about the structure, the oversight, the questions that we brought up vis-a-vis, you know, inviting people like Putin onto the board. But ultimately, this is the pathway in the right direction, and people want it to succeed. The question is obviously execution and whether this technocratic committee on the ground can actually deliver and do it in a way that is acceptable to all parties involved, and of course to the Palestinians and to Israel as well, to bring about long-term security.
Jumana, thank you so much. Jumana Barsachi there with the very latest, of course. We're waiting for the president to show up at the Congress, and coming up tomorrow, we'll also be speaking with the South African finance minister. Up next, it's Bloomberg Brief, and this is Bloomberg.
In New York City. Good morning. I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Here's what you need to know. President Donald Trump's Board of Meetings signing ceremony about to commence. We'll get more live from Davos coming right up. NATO Chief Mark Rutte says Greenland talks with President Trump did not include the issue of sovereignty as POTUS drops his tariff threats against Europe, citing a framework deal. That tariff relief helping risk appetite today, along with an AI rally that continues. We also, of course, get jobless claims later on and November PCE among data on deck. So let's take a look at those markets because risk appetite does seem to be coming back. We're getting a nice rally there in those futures. NASDAQ 100 futures continuing off yesterday's optimism following Jensen Huang's remarks that AI is going to be a labor story, that we're going to see a huge amount of investment and that's going to create labor over the coming years. Let's take a look at the bond universe because we saw a continued rebound in Japan as well. A lot of calm in this market. The 10-year yield right back down to 423.50. We're not under 420 yet, but we are going in that direction. Directionally as well for the 30-year yield is lower by more than a basis point. That 2-year yield, though, is staying a little elevated at 358.68. We have gold coming off just a little bit today, but Goldman Sachs raising its year-end target to gold by more than 10% to $5,400 an ounce now, in fact. Gold itself is about 4,800 and change at the moment. And the VIX index is right back to 16 and change. Let's get to some individual movers now, a few hours before the open of U.S. trade. Let's get to Chloe Melee in London.
Good morning, Bonnie. It's a good day for the semiconductor industry this morning with green across the screen for those names as part of this broader technology rally. And those names have also gotten a boost from the comments from the NVIDIA CEO in Davos, which really reinforced investor enthusiasm for this AI trade. And therefore, we are seeing green across the screen there, and ARM in particular doing well in pre-market trading. Moving on, but staying within that chip-making sector, and Intel is also in the green this morning, having yet another good good day ahead of its results later today. It will update the market on the progress of its turnaround plan after a really big rally in the shares lately. And it seems that investors are going into those earnings with a lot of confidence and a lot of enthusiasm for Intel. And finally, Ubisoft over in France is having a really difficult day today after cutting its guidance and also announcing a major restructuring plan that includes closing down the studios and cancelling or delaying games. And so we saw the steepest ever drop in the shares for Ubisoft, and we are down more than 30% right now.
Chloe, thank you so much. Chloe is going to be back with us a little later on for some more movers. President Trump to meet with his proposed board of peace, or at least the beginnings of it, a group of leaders to provide oversight for a transition in the war-torn Gaza Strip. Let's go straight to Davos now and Bloomberg's Jumana Bersecci. So, Jumana, this is the first sort of public gathering of members, potentially, of this board, but we really don't know yet who's going to make up this oversight committee, do we? We've had interest expressed from Mark Carney, but a hard no from Francis Macron, for example. A lot of different views out there.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we should be finding out very shortly, Vonnie, who exactly is going to be on the board, because as we speak, President Trump is arriving to the Congress Center for the Board of Peace signing ceremony. Now, what we do know is invitations have been sent out to over 50 heads of state. What we understand is about 20 of them have accepted so far, and those countries will likely be represented at this signing ceremony that is shortly due to commence. But as you say, it has been marked by a lot of controversy, not least, for example, President Putin has been invited to be on the board, which is somewhat surprising. President Zelensky also was invited, but he said, if Putin is going to be on this board, it's very difficult to see how we can work together on this one to bring about peace. One of the other criticisms is that the charter of the Board of Peace was leaked a couple of days ago, and it actually had no mention of Gaza, which is extremely ironic. It seemed to have sort of progressed in terms of ambitions to just being a Board of Peace with oversight of specifically Gaza to a more global peacekeeping mandate, and i.e. perhaps competing a little bit with the United Nations. So that, I think, has raised some eyebrows, especially among some of those Western leaders. One of the other controversies is reportedly there is a $1 billion fee that would need to be paid for permanent membership. So initially, these heads of state who are joining the board would subscribe to a 3-year mandate. If they want to continue, they'd have to cough up cash. Again, a big question about that. And then finally, the chair of the Board of Peace is none other than President Trump himself. And nowhere in the charter does it say that there'll be a rotating chair, i.e. he could be chair for life. And I think, again, some questions there about the ultimate authority that President Trump is going to have over this board. But that being said, I think, let's just take a moment away to emphasize that this is a very significant moment. It does mark the passage of phase 1 of that ceasefire deal in Gaza to phase 2. It is one element of phase 2. And of course, it is part and parcel of moving towards the pathway and ultimately to bringing about stability in the region. And what other people are saying is, ultimately, this is an internationalization of a conflict that has been localized for decades now. And the fact that you do have so many international players interested in being part of this Board of Peace is constructive.
Exactly. You do have to wonder if it isn't downplaying Gaza slightly, though, by making it a more general oversight committee, which originally didn't seem to be the intention. Let's move on to the Greenland issue, Jumana, because Bloomberg spoke to NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte about his talks with President Donald Trump. Let's have a listen to what he said.
We didn't discuss at all about that issue, so we discussed how can we protect Greenland, how can we protect the wider Arctic region. And again, I think President Trump was the one who reinvigorated NATO at the summit in The Hague with the famous 5%. I think we can be thankful for the fact that he again has been able to take leadership on this issue. How can we collectively protect the Arctic?
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte there. So no details really, Jumana, and this framework of a deal, we don't really know what it entails, do we?
Well, what I was saying earlier this morning is it started with an ice and it ended with a thaw yesterday. If you think about the sort of development of the day, the evolution of the day, When President Trump gave his speech yesterday afternoon, he reiterated his desire to acquire Greenland somehow, even if not by force. And the tone dramatically changed a couple of hours later after he had that meeting with the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who Bloomberg spoke to this morning. And after that, it was announced that a framework for the future of Greenland had been agreed to. We don't understand exactly what that framework entails, but what we do understand from speaking to the NATO Secretary General is that Greenland's sovereignty was not discussed at all. And ultimately, this is about a security arrangement for Greenland and for those Arctic countries. And perhaps one of the concessions is for the U.S. to have a stronger presence in military bases dotted around Greenland. But again, it's conjecture at this point. We don't know what is exactly in the contents of that deal. But in an interview that President Trump gave last night to CNBC, he did mention that critical minerals were also going to be a part of that framework as well. So yes, to go back to what I was saying, a de-escalation of tensions of sort. But again, a big rift opened up in that transatlantic alliance over the last couple of days. And you've got to wonder how quickly European leaders are going to rush back into really throwing their weight behind this, and also behind that EU-US trade deal that was agreed to last year. They will most certainly be having some reservations, especially after the comments that President Trump has made criticizing many of those European leaders in the last couple of days.
And in fact, those seats at that Board of Peace signing do seem to be filling up right now. I just see Javier Milei, and it looks like Benjamin Netanyahu is also on that stage, and we are getting more world leaders. So it does appear that we are going to have a signing ceremony along with several world leaders. Jumana, this Board of Peace, might it be successful? Does it need members from the West and from other jurisdictions? Can they all work together on something like this? If Putin joins, say, for example, and Mark Carney joins, and perhaps there's a representative, from well, obviously Netanyahu is going to be part of it. Viktor Orban, it looks like, as well. I mean, is this a group that can work together and decide things?
Well, I think you raise a very interesting point. And if you want to think about whether something is going to be successful, you have to understand what their objective is to begin with. What is exactly the KPIs that they're looking to achieve? And again, we don't have a lot of details on the ground there. But the fact that so many heads of state have shown interest to be a part of that, I think, is a positive signal. And you talk about the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. A couple of days ago, Israel had expressed their reservations to joining the Board of Peace. They were uncomfortable with some members that had been included, not least reportedly Qatar and Turkey, but they too seem to have changed their mind in the last 24 hours. So Netanyahu has actually signed on to it. In addition to many Arab states too, yesterday a group of them put out a note saying that they will sign on to this Board of Peace. They see it as a pathway to stability, including the likes of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Turkey, as I mentioned, Pakistan, amongst others too. So there is support from the Middle East region. You are hearing, for example, Milei was one of the first to sign on to it, the Argentinian president, obviously a close ally of U.S. President Trump. But then European leaders, again, expressing some reservations. President Macron, one of the first to reject the proposal, but open to discussions about what exactly the board's mandate is going to include. We spoke about some of the controversies earlier, and especially that $1 billion payment. Similar remarks coming through from Meloni. So not completely out of the question. Yes. But the fact that this is an international committee, I think, is quite significant. But they are an oversight committee, nothing to do with the day-to-day administration.
Absolutely, and we just see Mark Carney coming onto that stage as well, along with a host of other leaders. The State Department, in fact, had to instruct U.S. diplomats to suggest that President Trump's Board of Peace is not meant to replace the United Nations, but rather complement it, right? Jumana, we have this reporting today, which is fascinating, and even that idea of the $1 billion payment for a permanent membership, it almost mirrors the Security Council, right, where there are permanent members and then rotating members. So there does seem to be a little bit of mirroring here of an international body like the United Nations.
Yes, and in this particular instance, what you do have is this board of peace that's established with all of those as the heads of state that you list, and I think we're going to get a better understanding of which countries have signed up to it in just a few moments as you keep listing the countries that you're seeing there. But the way it's going to work is this is a board of peace that has oversight, and then there is a high representative that has been appointed. He is a Bulgarian diplomat, Mladenov is his name, and he ultimately will be overseeing the day-to-day activities of this a technocratic authority that's going to be composed of Palestinian nationals, all with technocratic backgrounds. And so they are the ones that are going to be tasked with the day-to-day administration of the Gaza Strip, with oversight from that representative who ultimately is going to report back to that board of peace.
All right, Jumana, do stay with us because President Trump has just taken the stage now, and we will actually tune in to the ceremony to listen to what President Trump has to say about this board of peace.
Long in the making, and many countries have just received their notice, and everybody wants to be a part of it. And we'll work with many others, including the United Nations. But I want to thank you all for being here. Yesterday we had an incredibly successful visit with many of the world's top business leaders, the best, the biggest, most successful, and foreign heads of state. And now we have one of the most important meetings of all, the official formation of what is known as the Board of Peace. I want to thank the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner, and their extraordinary work. I mean, they have done an amazing job. We have peace in the Middle East. Nobody thought that was possible. We've settled 8 wars, and I believe another one's coming pretty soon. You know what that is? The one that I thought was going to be an easy one has turned out to be probably the most difficult. Last month, 29,000 people died, mostly soldiers, in Ukraine, Russia. Think of that, 29,000, 27,000 in the month before, 26,000 in the month before that. It's terrible. But we have meetings and we think we're making a lot of progress. Thanks as well to Secretaries Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick, and Chris Wright, U.S. Trade Representative, Jamieson Greer. They're all doing such an incredible job. Ambassador Callista Gingrich, who is here, doing a fantastic, really fantastic work. Thank you, Callista. And many other members of my administration who are so committed to peace, and they're also committed to great success. Very importantly, let me recognize the very first group of distinguished members of the Board of Peace. They will be introduced by name in just a moment. Caroline will be doing that introduction. And to each and every one of you, we are truly honored by your presence today. Leaders of countries, in most cases, very popular leaders. In some cases, not so popular, but that's the way it goes in life. Thanks as well to President Karol Nawrocki of Poland, who's a fantastic man. He just won a very big election. I'm very proud of him. Amazing. Along with former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Tony Blair. Thank you, Tony, for being here. We appreciate it. And members of the Board of Peace Executive Board, great group. This week marks the 1-year anniversary of my second inauguration as president. No administration in history has achieved such a sweeping turnaround in 12 months' time at home and abroad. We have a tremendous mandate. We won the popular vote by millions. We won every swing state to 7. They were saying, can he win all 7? Is it possible? Because it's not done. And we won all 7. We have a great mandate back at home. As I said yesterday, the U.S. economy is booming with virtually no inflation. It was 1.2% for the last 3 months. And we inherited the worst inflation in the history of our country. And we have economic growth now of 5.4%, looks like. And I think that number can double and triple if we do the right things. And if we change thinking so that if you announce good numbers, the markets go up, instead of if you announce good numbers, the market goes down because everybody tries to kill it by lowering or raising interest rates depending on the situation. When America booms, the entire world booms. And we have secured commitments for over $18 trillion in new investment coming into our country, which is a record by many times over, not just by a little bit, by many times. There's no country ever in history that's gotten anywhere near that number. Slashed our trade deficit by 77%. This is in 1 year. Yesterday was 1 year. And signed historic trade deals with nations from all over the globe. Today, the world is richer, safer, and much more peaceful than it was just 1 year ago. We put out all those fires. A lot of people didn't know, including me, that some of those wars were going on. And some of them were going on for, in one case, 32 years, in another case, 35 years, and another one, 37 years. We were very happy to stop the war that had started with India and Pakistan, two nuclear nations. And I was very honored when the Prime Minister of Pakistan said President Trump saved 10 and maybe 20 million lives by getting that stopped just before bad things were going to happen. As president, I ended those 8 wars in 9 months, including Cambodia and Thailand. And by the way, many of the leaders are here. Kosovo and Serbia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda, Pakistan and India, Israel and Iran, Egypt and Ethiopia. We're working on that right now. I met yesterday with a very good general and a very good leader of Egypt. We're working on a dam that was built which precludes the Nile River from getting water. It's a little tough situation, but we'll get that settled. I really had it just about settled in my first term, and then we had a rigged election. Took me out of commission for a little while, but here I am back. We'll get it settled. But it's a pretty tough situation. A dam was built and the water doesn't come down to the Nile. When I think of Egypt, I think of the Nile, but I think of the Nile with water in it. Armenia and Azerbaijan, who, I mean, a lot of these leaders have become my friends. They become my friends. They're here. And of course, the war in Gaza, which is really coming to an end. We have little fires that we'll put out, but they're little. They were giant, massive fires, and now they're down to little fires. We can put them out very easily. We have 59 countries that are involved in peace in the Middle East. Many of them not in the Middle East. They're near the Middle East, but they're not in the Middle East. And many have said that if Hamas doesn't do what they promised they would do, and I think they probably will, but they were born with rifles in their hands. They were literally born. The first day they had a rifle put into their hands, but they have to give up their weapons. And if they don't do that, it's going to be the end of them. But many countries have told me we want to go in and do it, and they really aren't countries that you traditionally think of as being involved in that. But that's the fire. Hezbollah in Lebanon, we have to do something about that. But these are, I call them remnants. They're small remnants compared to what it was before. It was massive, large, powerful countries fighting each other. In another great victory for the ultimate goal of peace, in June, we obliterated Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity with Operation, we call it Operation Midnight Hammer. And it was midnight, it was dark, no moon, and every single one of those bombs from the B-2 bombers hit the air shafts and went deep into the earth and totally obliterated everything that they were doing. They were 2 months away from having a nuclear weapon. We can't let that happen. And Iran does want to talk, and we'll talk. We've also hit ISIS in Syria, and very strongly, as you know. In my first administration, I took out al-Baghdadi, the founder of ISIS, and he was trying to start it up again because due to the tremendous talent of General Raisin Kane, as I call him, he went wiped out ISIS in a period of 3 weeks in my first term. You know, we had a great first term, but the second term is, I think, blowing it away, actually. But we took out ISIS, and we had, it was gone, but during the Biden administration, it formed again a little bit. We hit it very hard in Syria. And Syria, by the way, I spoke with the president, is making a lot of progress, tremendous progress, actually. We're very happy about that. We took off all sanctions, which gives them a chance to breathe. And he is working very, very hard, and I think he's going to put it all together. So many things are happening, many good things. Threats to Europe and America, the Middle East, and other places are really calming down. It's a lot different than it was just 1 year ago. Just 1 year ago, the world was actually on fire. A lot of people didn't know it. And in Nigeria, we're annihilating terrorists who are killing Christians. We've hit them very hard. They've killed thousands and thousands of Christians. What's that all about? Much of this unprecedented success is possible because I rebuilt our military in my first term, and now we're making it even stronger. We have a budget of over $1 trillion this year, and next year we're going to 1.5 trillion. Our country's never done better economically. We're taking in numbers that we've never taken in, not only the fact that the investment is at 18 trillion plus, but our jobs numbers, everything is, I think, maybe better than ever before. I think you're going to see and a lot of you are investing in our country. I think you're going to be extremely happy with your investments. I think you'll see numbers like you haven't seen before. I also secured commitments from virtually all NATO allies to increase their defense spending to 5% of GDP. Everybody but Spain. I don't know what's happening with Spain. Why would they not do that? They want a free ride, I guess, huh? Every country but Spain increased to 5%. I don't know why. We're going to have to talk to Spain. With America's renewed attention to security of the Western Hemisphere, I've stopped the invasion on our southern border and designated the drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. And you probably saw that we've virtually stopped almost 100% all drugs coming in by water. Now we're going to stop them on land. The land is easy. The water is tough. But that's down now. I heard it just last night. It was 97. Now it's 98.1%. And we're trying to figure out who are the 2% that are willing to get onto those boats. I don't think they watch television or the news. But we've taken out almost 100% of all of the drugs coming into the United States by water. And now we'll, I think, very easily stop them on land. That's the easy part. We wanted to wait till the other was taken care of. And earlier this month, thanks to the unrivaled skill, power, and might of the U.S. military, we have the most powerful military in the world by far. We captured the outlaw dictator, Nicolas Maduro, and the people of Venezuela are very happy about it. And we're having great relationships with the new leaders of Venezuela. The relationships have been good. We're opening up the country to our giant oil companies, and it's going very well. We've already taken out, think of this, 50 million barrels of oil, and a lot of that's going to go back to Venezuela. They'll do more income with us in a short period of time than they did in years, because as much oil as they have, and they have a lot, just about the most. After us, there's a couple of countries that are in that category, but we have the most, actually, and they're second between Venezuela and us. We have 62% of the world's oil, but they have very little production, so they'll have a lot of production. All the oil companies, we had meetings, you probably saw, all the oil companies want to go in. They want to go in immediately. They're already touring the sites. But our military was amazing. That strike was amazing. We had a second wave coming. We didn't need it. They said, no second wave. We don't want a second wave. The first wave was enough. And of course, we're working to end the horrible killing in Ukraine, a war that should never have happened and would have never happened if I were president. That was not going to happen. I used to speak to Vladimir Putin about Ukraine, and it was the apple of his eye, but he would never have ever done it. Said, you can't do that, Vladimir. As part of this historic record of major peace initiatives, today we're announcing more details regarding the Board of Peace, so important. This board has the chance to be one of the most consequential bodies ever created, and it's my enormous honor to serve as its chairman. I was very honored when they asked me to do it. We had an idea to do it, and then they came, they said, you be the chairman. And, but I take it very seriously. We have a great group of people and incredible young people that are leading it from within. It's running beautifully, started already, and every country, just about every country, wants to be a part of it. And we just sent out the letters a couple of days ago, and these are just the countries that are here. They happen to be in Davos, so we said we'd be honored if you wanted to join us up on the stage. And it's really great. They're friends of mine. I think, let me see. Yeah, every one of them is a friend of mine. A couple, let's see, a couple I like, a couple I don't like. No, I like, actually, this group, I like every single one of them. Can you believe it? Usually I have about 2 or 3 that I can't stand. Usually I have 2 or 3 that I don't like. I don't find them up here. I like every one of these people. No, they're great people. They're great leaders. And the Board of Peace is composed of leaders, the top leaders in the world, actually. Last October, we released a plan for the permanent end to the conflict in Gaza, and I'm pleased to say that our vision was unanimously adopted by the United Nations Security Council late last year. Under phase 1 of this plan, we have painstakingly maintained that Gaza, and we're going to have it very strongly, and it's what we have. Maintained the Gaza ceasefire, delivered record levels of humanitarian aid. We've given aid, you know, you used to hear all the people were starving and it was terrible. Now we have, you don't hear that anymore. We've delivered record levels of humanitarian aid. I want to thank the United States, but I want to thank some of the countries that are sitting right up here, because they've sent great aid, aid also in the form of money, where we go out and purchase food, and you don't hear those stories anymore with people starving. And secured the release of all 20, you know, we secured the release of all 20 living hostages. Now, I want to thank Steve Witkoff and Jared and everybody for working so hard. They worked so hard, but there were 20 remaining living hostages. Now, we got hundreds out, but the last 20, I said, boy, that's going to be a tough one. And I said that a year before, and it was a tough one, but we got them. Got all 20, every one of them. And we had also about 28 that were dead, but the parents wanted them just as though they were living, just as much. Some cases, it almost seemed more. It was amazing, actually, the love. But their boy had been killed in just about all cases, young men. Their boy had been killed, and they wanted the body of the boy, and it looked like it couldn't be done. And with the exception of one, and we're close on the track of that, we've got them all, every single one of them, which is amazing. It's a rough job. That was a rough job. And I've been very clear that Hamas must return that last remaining deceased hostage as well, and that will be the full commitment. And then we get on to other things, and we're committed to ensuring Gaza is demilitarized, properly governed, and beautifully rebuilt. It's going to be a great plan, and that's where the Board of Peace really started. And I think we can spread out to other things as we succeed with Gaza. We're going to be very successful in Gaza. It's going to be a great thing to watch, and we can do other things. We can do numerous other things. Once this board is completely formed, we can do pretty much whatever we want to do, and we'll do it in conjunction with the United Nations. You know, I've always said the United Nations has got tremendous potential, has not used it, but there's tremendous potential in the United Nations, and you have some great people at the United Nations, but so far it hasn't. You know, on the 8 wars that I ended, I never spoke to the United Nations about any of them. And you would think that I should have. You would think they could have done those 8 wars, but they couldn't have. And they tried, I guess, in some of them, but they didn't try hard enough. But there's tremendous potential with the United Nations, and I think the combination of the Board of Peace with the kind of people we have here, coupled with the United Nations, can be something very, very unique for the world. It's for the world. This isn't United States. This is for the world. As everyone can see today, the first steps toward a brighter day for the Middle East and a much safer future for the world are unfolding right before your very eyes. Together, we are in a position to have an incredible chance. I don't even call it a chance. I think it's going to happen. To end decades of suffering, stop generations of hatred and bloodshed, and forge a beautiful, everlasting, and glorious peace for that region and for the whole region of the world, because I'm calling the world a region. The world is a region. We're going to have peace in the world. And boy, would that be a great legacy for all of us. Everybody in this room is a star, or you wouldn't be here. There's a reason that you're here, and you're all stars. You're the biggest people, the most important people in the world, most powerful people in the world. And when you use that genius that you have, that very unusual, very inspired genius, when you use that for peace, the opposite of peace has no chance. So I just want to say it's tremendous to be with you, and I think this is something that we're doing that's very important. This is the most important. I was so looking forward to being here, and yesterday was a tremendous success. A lot of good things happened, but this was something that I really wanted to be here and do, and I could think of no better place because so many people were together. And now to bring the Board of Peace into full force, I ask Sheikh Isa of Bahrain and Foreign Minister Barita of Morocco to join me in signing and ratifying the Board of Peace Charter. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, this is the Trump Board of Peace. I guess its first meeting, although it hasn't been fully formed yet, and a signing ceremony with representatives from Bahrain and Morocco, along with President Trump. We know that there are several members that have signed up, including Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Morocco, Azerbaijan, Armenia, a whole host of countries. And the president also thanking former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair and the executive board, including people like Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, and other members of the administration and advisors to the administration and people close to the administration. He said the Board of Peace would work closely with the United Nations. Of course, we know the State Department had sent out a missive to diplomats saying that this is not meant to replace the United Nations in any way. Although we have to say that Mark Carney, for example, of Canada, who had said he would be interested and who still has signaled that he's up for joining the board, said on Tuesday that it should be designed to address Gaza's needs. Mark Carney, in fact, not on that stage, though several other world leaders are. Let's get to Bloomberg's Jumana Bersetchi, who's in Davos, because that is a very important point, Jumana. We heard a lot today. We heard about Venezuela. We heard President Trump saying that he had ended 8 wars. He talked a little bit about Iran and said that Iran wanted to talk and that he would talk with Iran. But there wasn't all that much about Gaza and what comes next for that area of the world.
Well, as is customary to any of these President Trump speeches, he touted a lot of his administration's achievements, and not just specific to Gaza, but around the world. And I think he has given the Trump administration a lot of credit for so-called, quote-unquote, ending wars and conflicts in many parts of the world, which was actually one of the reservations that people had vis-a-vis the establishment of this Board of Peace. How much of its mandate is going to be really focused on Gaza versus establishing a more global peacekeeping entity, which actually might compete with the United Nations. But interesting to note that just now he said that the goal is to work alongside the United Nations. So it was very clear he wanted to make that point in the remarks that he just gave. And as it pertains to Gaza, he also spoke about Phase 1 and the importance of the cessation of hostilities, then the release of the hostages in exchange for those prisoners. He also said that key now is absolutely Hamas disarmament and that they would be completely abolished if they don't go down that route. He also mentioned that there's been a lot of pressure applied to Hamas to release the last deceased hostage. So there was a little bit of a mention and reference to that. But now, really, the hard work begins. And the hard work entails reconstruction of the Strip, the establishment of that technocratic Palestinian group that I mentioned earlier, which is essentially going to be a committee established pure Palestinian technocrats with the responsibility of the day-to-day administration that will ultimately report into this Board of Peace and the executive board. The executive board, one of the members being Tony Blair himself, a figurehead that's very well known in the Middle East region. And so this is one of the elements of Phase 2. It is not Phase 2 in itself. The Board of Peace is meant to be an oversight authority, but the day-to-day administration is still going to be conducted by Palestinians. And crucial to the success of this phase is the full disarmament of Hamas, because the withdrawal of the remainder of IDF forces is not going to happen until the Israeli side feels that the Strip is going to be a place where there actually will be some stability in the future. One other element of Phase 2 is the establishment of an international peacekeeping force. Still not a lot of detail on which countries are going to be subscribed to that. So yes, a big moment, but only one pillar in a very ambitious project for the region.
And in fact, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has also now pushed back over the inclusion of officials from Qatar and Turkey as well. So a lot of controversy still to do with this board, though the president says the United Nations Security Council accepted the vision for it earlier this year, and he plans to do work alongside the United Nations. And of course, countries still making decisions on whether to join this board or not. I imagine that many countries will want to have a say in what goes on and what kind of decisions this board makes. But then you also have to wonder who will carry out any resolutions that this board makes and who will be able to ensure oversight if this board makes decisions that are, let's say, not in alignment with some other world bodies on these issues. All right, that's Bloomberg's Jemana Bersecci. Thank you so much. We do want to check markets for you here in the United States as we approach the open in just a few hours. We are seeing futures higher, risk appetite coming back in a healthy way. We have the VIX just above 16, so much more muted than it has been over the past 2 days. The dollar index relatively flat. Let's take a look at bonds because Japan has continued to calm, and that's calming the yield curve in the United States as well. We're back to 424.09 on the 10-year yield, so still above that range that we've been in, but again, not exactly too elevated. The 485.80 mark on the 30-year yield, well below the 493, 494 that we hit earlier on this week. Now, natural gas continues to climb. Obviously, here in the United States, we're seeing a huge cold snap in the Northeast. And you also have the likes of gold coming off the boil, if you like. Gold is still above $4,800 an ounce, and Goldman Sachs today raising its forecast for the end of the year to $5,400 an ounce, saying that the types of geopolitical risks that investors are hedging against by buying gold will not be resolved by the end of this year. So let's get to our guest now. Priya Misra of JP Morgan Asset Management joins us now. She is portfolio there, one of the core bond funds. So Priya, what a week for bond managers and just for bond watchers in general. What we saw earlier this week, would you call it a yippee treasury market? Would you call it something that's showing fault lines underneath the surface? And is it a longer term issue given that it was really sparked by fiscal concerns out of Japan?
Sure. So great question. I think it was a bunch of cross currents. So we've had this, I guess, lingering concern around Fed independence. So who's the next Fed chair? The entire DOJ issue. I think that's lingering in the background. And then you had the Japan move. Global rates are highly correlated. So the fact that Japanese bond yields, I didn't think in my career I would see the, essentially a 30 basis point move in the long end. We had that, and then that tends to spark a rise in term premium globally. So I think, you had this Fed independence issue, then you had the Sell America issue along with Japan. I think it was this sort of perfect storm, and the market is a little less liquid. Risk appetite with all of the geopolitical risks out there, with the fact that there's this concern around, how much risk premiums should be, I think the market essentially panicked. So was it yippee? Absolutely. I think in the last couple of days, we've had a bunch of sort of comforting signs. So we've had the Japan bond market. That's what I've been watching. We haven't been getting a whole lot of sleep because essentially that, we've noticed that there's some stability there, those Japanese bonds, JGB markets calming down. I don't think we're entirely out of the woods though, so we'll be watching that. We have the BOJ meeting on Friday. So, but I think some calm there, and the fact that we've had a lot of corporate bond supply in the US, we're continuing to see demand there. And the fundamentals, when you have all these sort of technical cross currents, you look at the fundamentals are still, we're in a strong, resilient US economy. Inflation is still heading lower. We're in this low fire, low higher economy. And so, I think, and the Fed independence issue, I think, it's something we're going to have to grapple with. But I listen to the Supreme Court, I listen to the Senate, I even hear this from the administration. Everyone wants an independent, credible Fed.
Yes.
So I would say, we are using these as opportunities. When you get this yippee bond market, I think that's an opportunity to take on duration risk, keep the credit risk in there, because as long as the fundamentals are strong, we still like credit. But I think duration, that's where there's an opportunity.
The MOVE index has been incredibly low, right? And yet we saw the beginnings of what could have been really nasty, outcomes here for the bond market. We had to have the Treasury Secretary in Davos calm the market. We had to have Japan's economic minister come out and say, look, we have our eyes on this. We're going to do something. Everyone should remain calm. And we also had the Treasury Secretary say that he spoke to Japanese officials. All of that had to happen before the bond market calmed down. I mean, at some point, does the bond market stop believing these officials that everyone should just calm down? Where's the evidence?
I think, if the fundamentals remain solid, I still keep coming back to fundamentals. So if inflation remains well-behaved, heading closer to 2%, we're going to get inflation data later today. I think then we have to watch the news. We have, there's a lot of uncertainty, geopolitical, fiscal uncertainty. Do we get any big fiscal expansion in the US? I think, so I still come back to if the fundamentals remain where they are, where we're not going to get additional fiscal, we already know what the one big beautiful bill will entail. I think then, we look at these as opportunities. We think that this is, this will calm down. It's hard to say what that peak is. We've been thinking 3.75 to 4.25 on the 10-year. We still hold by that range. Will the Sell America narrative take on because somebody decides to diversify a little bit out of the US? I think then that's an opportunity when you break out of that range. So I think the range is solid. Can you have headlines, news, all of the cross currents take us a little bit away from the range? Absolutely. But I think we still, look at fundamentals and think that range should hold.
The FOMC meeting is next week already, right? We'll hear from Fed Chair Jay Powell. Does he hold as much credibility as he did a couple of weeks ago? And is there anything that could surprise us next week?
I think the market's not expecting much next week. I think rightfully so, because I think the easy, if I may say so, the easy risk management rate cuts are done. And the Fed has indicated that they're going to be on hold. There's no urgency. They're waiting for inflation to get closer to 2%. On your question around Fed credibility, I think the Fed has been credible for a while, and I think that credibility, if at all, got stronger over the last 2 weeks, because what we've seen is strong pushback from the Fed chair, talking about Fed independence. We've heard it from the Senate, we've heard it from the Supreme Court. So I think the Fed chair, and now is there a division at the Fed? Absolutely. Look at the economic environment. I think it's right that there are some people who are concerned about the inflation side of the mandate. There are others who are concerned about the labor side of the mandate. I think that division remains. We're not going to get a dot plot, but that dot plot suggests that division. But I think for the chair of the Fed to say, we've done a lot, we're going to wait and see the data, we're going to remain focused on our dual mandate, I think that's what we'll hear, and that's good for the market.
What's the next big risk catalyst? I mean, obviously we get jobs the week after, but in this environment, it feels like that's years away. Anything can happen between now and then.
Right. So I think, back to, we will be watching jobs, we'll be watching inflation. We get some data today. Initial claims would be important. Other than that, I would say what we're watching is as corporates are starting to issue, there's been a lot of issuance so far. We expect more issuance. We'll be watching in terms of catalysts. Does that demand for fixed income remain strong? Given all of the headlines, do people still look at fundamentals and say, look, I'm getting income from fixed income, I'm getting, diversification, essentially just watching.
To that point, Priya, is the whole universe of corporate issuance all one, or can people sort of be on a buyer's strike when it comes to AI debt eventually, let's say, and still have plenty of appetite for everything else out there?
I think, we'll be looking at earnings as well. So there's going to be a lot of AI issuance. We know that they're building out. It has to be funded. We're seeing significant demand because the earnings are still there. So as long as the earnings remain solid, as long as AI adoption starts to pick up, and we do expect this is the year or the next year, we're going to see AI adoption across the board. As long as that happens, the profit numbers remain, the revenue numbers remain. I think, that demand for AI debt, now it's all about valuations. There will be likely some concession that will have to be, if you get a large amount of issuance, we expect some widening in those spreads. I would expect that demand does remain across the board. But I'm glad you bring this up because dispersion within the credit market is rising. You look at credit spreads and they look extremely tight, but then you start looking at CCC, that's where there's much more widening. I think, if you're late in the credit cycle, do we have credit cockroaches, which was the big rage, late last year? I think we have to be really careful. We look at fundamentals, we look at, leverage ratios, we look at, revenue numbers. And I think that's when we will need to make sure that we pick up that dispersion. So we're careful about what we're buying, what we're not. So I would say overall, we're seeing demand for fixed income, but it's up to us as active fund managers to make sure that we buy what we like and, sort of underweight the sectors where we think that spreads are too tight.
Priya, we have to leave it there, but thank you so much going on in this market. Very appreciative for your time. That is Priya Misra of JP Morgan Asset Management. We are seeing futures higher today. It does look like it's going to be more of a risk appetite on kind of day, particularly for the Nasdaq 100 after yesterday Jensen Huang injected some optimism into the AI market in particular. We had the Philly SOX index up big and hitting records once again. So we're back with that trade as well. Let's look at the bond universe because, as Priya said, that 10-year is going to stay in that range, and indeed it is well within that range today at 423.89, well below the almost 430 that we hit earlier in this week. The 30-year yield at 485, and obviously gold just off a little bit today, but again still above $4,800 an ounce, with Goldman Sachs raising its target by more than 10% for year-end to $5,400 an ounce. Now, let's get back to Davos. We have Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix moderating a panel that includes the European Investment Bank President, Nadia Calvino, and Irish Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, on European productivity and funding innovations.
How will we be able to attract talents here?
Do you ever wish you were based in the US?
I decided to build this company starting with Europe, to scale it in the US. So we're in the United States, we're in the UAE. We want to be a global leader with European roots. And why did I do that? Because I believe in Europe, and I believe it comes back to what you were saying about peace. The mission of our company is to build space vehicles for humanity. It means every vehicle we built, capsule first and then rockets, we built it across nations so that we can share critical military and civil technologies across these nations. So we want to scale the European model of collaboration across the world. And that's why we started in Europe, because I think that's really important. Space is the future of humanity. We can decide to build it in a confrontational manner. And of course, some will do it because this is our human nature. But we can decide to build it in the way we've built the European Union. And this is what we're trying to do with the Exploration Company, so far successfully, actually.
Taoiseach, I mean, if, what would you do? What would you change tomorrow if you didn't need unanimity? Full stop.
I mean, I think that the single market, in my view, I think the Capital Markets Union, are personal, and there are political challenges. I mean, you're correct. It's a structural. It's democracy too, by the way, which is a positive. And one of the most positive things Europe is going for it is it's a beacon, it's a bastion of free speech, freedom of assembly. All of these things are very valuable. Strong culture. A lot of people want to come to Europe to live. A lot of people want to come to Europe to work. So those are the fundamental strengths. But I think from a competitiveness point of view, certainly, like some of the omnibus simplification measures that have already been introduced by the President of the Commission have been slowed down in Parliament or have been not supported. And so that multi-layered structure is a problem. We're not a company. We're 27 member states, all political entities, polities that have parliaments and so on. So this is complex. And that's challenging in terms of efficacy and getting things done quickly. On the other hand, if you go through COVID-19, European Union probably responded more effectively than anybody else in the world, in my view, in terms of export authorization. It didn't prohibit the export of any component part of vaccines. It was the strongest donator of vaccines globally.
and I think did a fantastic job working with industry. I was a health minister in the early 2000s. That level of coordination between the Commission and industry was not there. Wouldn't have been there when SARS erupted. It was there during COVID. I pay tribute to the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and others. I think that was a very effective partnership, and Europe showed its strength and what it's capable of doing. And remember, the key vaccine, one of the key vaccines was BioNTech. It was a European vaccine, actually. Pfizer, and that's a good partnership. You know, they were a mega company. They managed to distribute, market, and so on. It became known as the Pfizer drug. It's kind of interesting. But actually, and it was a good combination and a good partnership. So I think those are illustrations of what can be done. But we do need, on the entrepreneur side, we do need more VC availability, venture capital and so on, and companies do need, and there is that sense in Europe that it's not as freely available to SMEs as a lot of our companies, some of their orientation is US in terms of venture capital. And that's a problem. That shouldn't be the case. We've had discussions in some sectors like health, for example, where there are significant barriers, where you have almost 27 individual competencies and in terms of regulatory bodies and so on. And so there are clear areas where we can simplify. And there's a political will to simplify. Definitely, there's a will in the Commission to simplify regulation. But the problem that was referenced earlier of how you get through the different structures is the challenge.
But Nadia Calvino, is it structural or is it also just a political cycle, right?
Well, I very much agree with what has been said, that in a way it's the challenge of Europe and it's one of its strengths, that we provide a message of stability to investors. So you know that there's not going to be a situation as we live with some other superpowers in the world, where you wake up in the morning and you wonder what happened, and then by lunchtime maybe it has changed, and by night it's a different policy. So Europe is trying to provide a very different message. It's one of the beacons. It's an anchor with a swiveling chain. So it can move, but your bases, your values are very clear. And I was thinking about this when Nicolas was talking about their currents and the winds. In that kind of situation, you know what you need: a clear compass. Where are you heading? A strong leadership, which I hope tonight, we will see this strong leadership, and everybody rowing in the same direction. And I think that is the recipe for our success. And the second thing I really wanted to share, and the diagnosis of what needs to be done: market integration, large-scale investment, simplification, and I would add win-win partnerships around the world. And the Mercosur agreement is a very good example of what's going on in terms of Europe reaching out to the rest of the world and building on its strength as a world superpower in trade. The diagnosis is clear, and what I think we need to do is to get on with it and do it. And from the European Investment Bank's perspective, we're trying to contribute to all of them, and in particular mobilizing private investment. I wanted to just mention this venture capital issue, because indeed, Europe is in a certain sense, and we had discussed this, Hélène, in one of our meetings, is the incubator of the world. So we have excellent startups, excellent ideas, technologies, talent, but then when these companies need to scale, they don't have a totally integrated market, and they cannot find 500 million, 1 billion that may be necessary at a later stage in a growth stage of their cycle. And that is an area where, if we're going to try to the maximum to make a difference from the European Investment Bank, to be a catalyzer, to try to reach the necessary scale for Europe.
And that was Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix conducting a panel at the World Economic Forum in Davos on whether Europe can make waves. It's treading water right now. You can follow all of the panels and all of the happenings on your terminal at TLIV Go. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. Alibaba preparing to list its chip-making arm T-Head. It's tapping strong investor interest in the small circle of companies looking to compete with NVIDIA in the AI accelerators business. Sources say that as a first step, Alibaba plans to restructure the unit as a business partly owned by employees. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman has been meeting with top investors in the Middle East to line up funding for a new investment round that could total at least $50 billion. According to sources, those investors included some of the leading state-backed funds in Abu Dhabi. OpenAI also recently held talks with Amazon to raise at least $10 billion. The Japanese bond sell-off that wiped out $41 billion across the curve was triggered by just $280 million of trading. The rout pushed yields to records, stoking worries that Japan was headed into a Liz Truss moment. It led U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent to seek reassurances for what he called a 6 standard deviation move. Now a look at what's ahead today. We get PCE data along with GDP data and jobless claims out at 8:30 Eastern, followed by personal income and spending at 10. Blue Origin planning to launch the new Shepherd mission today. And Intel earnings report after the market close. Of course, Intel has seen a great couple of days for that stock. We also, of course, had the Board of Peace first meeting today. Several founding members. You see Jared Kushner speaking there right now. This is in Davos. We had the signing ceremony earlier with pledges from Donald Trump to work with the United Nations. Futures pointed higher. That's it for Bloomberg Brief. Surveillance continues the conversation. This is Bloomberg.
Say that there's maybe a little bit of a bubble in AI. When you have companies with market caps of $5 trillion, you don't see any bubble there at all?
Whenever we have an acceleration in technology and people get excited about it, you have significant capital formation around new companies that are trying to capitalize on that opportunity. And, you know, we've seen this before through history, and you're seeing it now. It won't be a straight line. The opportunity set with AI is enormous. There will be winners and losers. And it's hard to pick the winners and losers now. And certainly a lot of the capital that's being deployed will not produce adequate returns. And a bunch of the capital that's being deployed will actually not produce any returns. But it's hard, it's hard to call the timing on these things. And the thing I'd point to just from a historical lens is in the fall of 1996, Alan Greenspan talked about irrational exuberance in stock markets, and the NASDAQ was at 1,300. And the NASDAQ peaked 3.5 years later at over 5,000. So, these things can go on for a long time, but ultimately, there are adjustments, there will be drawdowns, there'll be rebalancing, and just, it's hard to call it because the technology trend and the investment is real.
Why do the biggest names in business choose Bloomberg Television?
That's a great question.
It's a very good question.
Interesting question. Good question. Great question. I so appreciate that question. You certainly ask interesting questions.
Bloomberg Television. Top experts, great questions.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute global news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Joanna Versace in Davos, Switzerland, and this is Bloomberg.
Global diversification in fixed income markets is actually valuable for the first time in a long time.
The US bond market is still the most liquid market in the world.
The long end of the yield curve will go up.
The 10-year is doing its job. If we could get ahead of our fiscal policy problems, I think we could calm the bond markets down.
Bloomberg Surveillance, live from Davos with Jonathan Farrow, Lisa Abramowitz, and Anne-Marie Hordern.
Live from Davos, Switzerland this morning. Good morning for our audience worldwide. Bloomberg Surveillance starts right now. What a week at the World Economic Forum, where national leaders have been convening for the last several days. The most accurate forecaster of the week The Finnish president, Alexander Stubb, asked earlier this week what would happen with Greenland by the time we got to the end of the week, and he said things would be diffused. They would stabilise. That is exactly where we are so far this morning. Equities rebounded yesterday, and Lisa, some follow-through so far this morning.
Yeah, and you're seeing it in a broad-based rally across the U.S., but also very much in Europe, because no troops going into Greenland. We learned that. There are going to be no tariffs on Europe come February 1st. A real question, though, is everything back to where it was before Davos? And the answer for a lot of people is maybe not. There is a clear feeling of ill will among a lot of European officials here. Let's see if that carries out into action at their upcoming meeting.
It's important to frame how we got to this place. I think a lot of people might wake up and conclude, looking at the comments from the president yesterday evening and earlier on again this morning, and say this is another case of the president's so-called chickening out. I think that would be unfair. An unfair characterization as to what happened this week. What happened this week? This was the first time that G7 allies had really had enough and started to push back. We saw that from Canada. We saw that with France as well. The president was this close to crossing a line.
It's a great point, Jonathan. This just wasn't a classic taco, as you would call it. Trump always chickens out. And the difference between how the G7 and European leaders acted here in Davos than in prior events that I have traveled with the president is that they did it publicly. You always hear they're pushing back at the president, but that is behind the scenes. Here, they took their moments, whether speaking to the press or at global stages to address the forum, pushing back at how the United States is handling in what many would call a new global order.
The question you've got to ask, Lisa, now is, does that set the stage for how this relationship will be for the remainder of the president's second terms? When he pushes, are we going to see a lot more of the people on the other side pushing back?
I was struck by something that Rishi Sunak, the former Prime Minister of the UK, said this morning when he said it's clear that we need more hard power, because ultimately it's clear that that's what speaks volumes in this type of rhetoric. Soft power doesn't work in the same way, and that's why you're going to see all these additional investments in military equipment in the Euro region and beyond. It is clear that something else speaks volumes in this new world order, as Mark Carney was talking about. That's a shift, and that is material, and you really can feel it tangibly here.
Got a fantastic lineup here at Davos, Switzerland throughout this morning. We'll be catching up with the U.S. Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, the U.S. Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, and the Bank of America Chairman and CEO, Brian Moynihan. Lots of questions for him, including the upgrade to the GDP forecast that came from Bank of America and the economists and the research department in the last week. And I think it's important to point this out, that when you speak to business leaders, away from the volatility in international relations, they are very bulled up on the outlook for America this year.
And this, to me, is the dichotomy, because on one hand, you hear European leaders talking about how they need to just diverge from the United States, move away from it. And then you talk to business leaders, Sergio Armati with you, UBS, you can't. There is no other like the United States in terms of momentum. And you see that with business leaders, too, saying, look, if you look at AI, you look at growth, you look at the consumer, it is very strong in the United States, and you have to be exposed.
Teddy Koch, I think, framed it quite nicely. The difference between selling and buying less. And I think she framed it so well when she said, ultimately, you'll just see people buying less. And that's the diversification story that might develop in the years to come.
It doesn't actually mean that people are sell, sell, sell America. It's what a lot of people on this program have been talking about, global diversification. You just want to make sure you have other assets elsewhere. And the place to be right now, everyone is just pouring into, has been what? Precious metals, gold, and that has been a continuous theme from last year that is carrying over to 2026.
So we check out gold. New forecast over at Goldman Sachs. What are we? 3 weeks into the new year. We've got a new year-end forecast over at Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, coming out and saying not 4,800. They're talking about 5,600 for the year-end total per ounce for the precious metal gold. It is notable. It is just 3 weeks into the year, and they are already upgrading the forecast. Why? Because it's not just global central banks that are diversifying into the precious metal. It's now institutional investors. It's now retail investors, and they tend to be stickier and longer lasting. And suddenly you've got central bankers that are competing with the retail investors for a limited supply. And this really is a dynamic that's helping to boost up prices.
And also, why, guys, it's a Trump news cycle. We are 3 weeks into the new year, and look what already has been, what has happened on the geopolitical space, the capturing of Nicolas Maduro, the threatening of Greenland, and that is just international. Look at what is going on domestically, and I caught up with the National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett, who said even more of those ideas about affordability, which some of them are quite populist, that's going to come out at the State of the Union. Well, that's not till February, so we have a long road ahead, what feels like election cycles within just 2-3 weeks' time.
It is going to be a long year. The President of the United States dominating this get-together in Davos, Switzerland. Take a listen to what he had to say a little bit earlier.
Yesterday was a tremendous success. A lot of good things happened. There's tremendous potential with the United Nations, and I think the combination of the Board of Peace with the kind of people we have here, coupled with the United Nations, can be something very, very unique for the world.
Joining us now in Washington, D.C. is Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. Tyler, welcome to the program. Plenty of headlines here to process internationally. How's it playing out in Washington, D.C.?
Hey, John, good morning. Well, at this point, I think that it wasn't just European allies that had that collective sigh of relief when it came to the developments and President Trump backing off of his threats to impose those additional tariffs against countries that have rallied support around Greenland, but also here in Washington, too. We've heard from multiple lawmakers on Capitol Hill, spanning both sides of the aisle, that they are applauding President Trump's move to strike what he is calling a framework of a future deal. Although we haven't heard many specifics on exactly what this will entail, the president himself says that the understanding on the table is enough for him to back off of his threats to impose those additional levies. And I bring that up because we really have heard congressional lawmakers on both sides of the aisle raise concerns about the president taking any sort of unilateral action when it comes to Greenland. And that is the needle that particularly Republicans are starting to thread here in Washington, perhaps agreeing with the president's ideas when it comes to expanding U.S. influence in the Arctic, agreeing when it comes to his position on advancing national security to counter Russia and China, but disagreeing with the fact that until yesterday, the White House had not ruled out that there would be military force used to take over Greenland in some sense. Though, John, of course, it did appear that we were moving towards that off-ramp after the president did confirm that he wasn't intending to use massive military force when it came to the territory. Now, it was interesting to learn that this came after President Trump met privately with the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who told Bloomberg News earlier this morning that the pair did not discuss Greenland sovereignty at all. Instead, they were focused on the broader issue of national security in the Arctic. That has left us with a lot of questions on what this potential deal could entail. We know that one of the things on the table is the U.S.'s plans for a Golden Dome missile defense system. That is something that has pretty broad support in the U.S. Congress, as well as what U.S. involvement in Greenland's military, in Greenland's critical mineral rights is ultimately going to look like. You heard the president earlier. He said that this is going to be a long-term deal. That has led some analysts to believe that he is perhaps referencing the outlines of a potential lease when it comes to U.S. involvement there. John, there's a lot that we're going to follow here, but of course, it was critical to hear Denmark's point of view, including their prime minister affirming that sovereignty is not on the table, but that we should look out for deals potentially when it comes to the security, economy, and of course, what President Trump loves to tout, and that's investment.
Tyler, sitting here in Davos, Switzerland, we heard from Senator Tom Tillis, but really it's been the European reaction that has been visceral when it comes to President Trump's rhetoric on Greenland. Do you think it was the Europeans that really pushed him to take the temperature down, or was it his own party in Washington?
Well, it's probably a combination of the two, Anne-Marie, though, of course, we really did see our European allies take this strong stance, including the fact that there are still some open questions about what some of the ramifications from the escalation over the last week are going to entail, including that the European Parliament had delayed ratifying the U.S.-EU trade deal in the wake of this, and were planning their own retaliatory tariffs that we know were already in part queued up because of prior escalation with the Trump administration. We've also seen this dovetail into other issues too, right? We saw a stark confrontation between President Trump and the French President Emmanuel Macron that resulted in President Trump threatening that 200% tariff against French wine and champagne. But that didn't just have to do with what was escalating rhetoric over Greenland. That also had to do with the Board of Peace, which we saw earlier this morning, President Trump on stage ratifying that agreement with their signatures, and concerns from our European allies that the issue of Greenland is now taking away from another critical issue on the table, and that is what is going to happen in Ukraine, including the fact that the U.S. had invited Russian President Vladimir Putin to play a role in this Gaza Board of Peace, and the concerns that this is going to extend into other international issues. Of course, a big headline this morning was that President Trump says that he wants the Board of Peace to work in, quote, conjunction with the United Nations. Anne-Marie, as you well know, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff told you that they do think that there are about 90% there when it comes to a potential peace agreement. Ukrainian President Zelensky has landed there in Davos for this highly anticipated meeting with President Trump, though we still know there are a lot of big sticking points, particularly when it comes to territory, as Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, get ready to head to Moscow for another round of negotiations with the Russian President, Vladimir Putin.
Hey, Tyler, great work as always down in Washington, D.C. Tyler Kendall. Very much the last 24 hours, I think, defined by what didn't happen rather than what did. Didn't really talk about tariffs. That deadline for credit card interest caps, that's kind of come and gone. At least we're sitting here today and I've got no idea what the future of that policy is, but I imagine for the bankers here in Davos, Switzerland, they're happy. It's hardly been talked about.
Yeah, they're happy that their focus has been on Greenland and other things and tariffs, and their focus really has been taken off the domestic. I'll add to that home affordability, housing affordability. We were expecting to have a speech about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and exactly how they were going to lower prices. That was just a footnote, and then we found out from the administration, expect more details maybe next week. So the temperature has been taken down on a lot of domestic issues. Very much in the focus is the geopolitics of the moment and just whether the United States has caused a permanent breach in the relationship between the U.S. and Europe.
To use the Prime Minister's words, Prime Minister Carney, a rupture, not a transition. It's been a big week.
It's been a huge week, and the president really focused on foreign policy while he's here, and you have to wonder how much is this going to resonate with Americans back home. The polling on Greenland for the administration has been not helpful for them. About 80% of Americans do not want the United States to acquire Greenland. Maybe they're open to some deals, but the president has a view of it's better to buy, or why rent when you can buy. But for now, it looks like there will be renting and negotiations in earnest potentially happening. When it comes to affordability, I guess we have to wait until the State of the Union, according to Kevin Hassett, with things like housing. When you mention credit cards, though, Jamie Dimon was quite spicy on credit cards.
Love that take. You see that?
And he gave a dig to Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, individuals who have pushed for a 10% interest rate cap without naming their name. But maybe, try this. If you think it's such a good idea, try this in Vermont and Massachusetts.
See how it works out. That's the message from Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan. We'll be talking about some of these issues with Brian Moynihan at Bank of America later on this morning. It just feels like in the last 24 hours, we've just turned the volume down just a little bit, but the issues have not gone away. Let's give you an update on stories worldwide this morning with your Bloomberg Brief. Let's cross over to Vonnie Quinn for more. Hey, Vonnie.
Hey, John. Good morning. President Donald Trump launching his Board of Peace initiative today in Davos, which he says will promote geopolitical stability. The president adding the organization would, quote, work with many others, including the United Nations. Trump was joined on stage by founding members of the board, including Argentine President Javier Milei. A major reversal from President Trump when it comes to Greenland. The president saying he won't impose tariffs on goods from countries that oppose his plans to gain possession of the island. He says he's reached the framework of a future deal after a meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Secretary General Rutte says Greenland's sovereignty was not part of the discussion. Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan was left off the invite list for a reception honoring President Donald Trump last night in Davos. The Financial Times reporting Moynihan was the only CEO of a major Wall Street bank not to be invited. It marks the second time the White House has left Moynihan out of such a gathering. Moynihan, though, will join the surveillance team in Davos at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. And that is your Bloomberg Brief. Sending it back to you guys in Davos. John.
Hey, Vonnie. Appreciate it. More from Vonnie in about 30 minutes' time. Up next on the programme, we'll catch up with Per Franson, the CEO of EQT, the world's second largest private equity firm.
politics to the world of business, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live 2 times a day, every trading day. Balance of Power at 1 and 5 Eastern, only on Bloomberg.
Technology is embedded in every aspect of our lives.
And laying the foundation for the future.
From finance to defense, AI to entertainment.
And from the road to the stars. Bloomberg brings you the latest stories of the people and companies pushing the tech sector to new frontiers.
And the politics that shape global tech markets.
I'm Caroline Hyde in New York.
And I'm Ed Ludlow in San Francisco.
Watch Bloomberg Tech every weekday.
Only on Bloomberg Television.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories. Insight with Haslinda Amin, only on Bloomberg.
Live from Davos, Switzerland this morning. Good morning. Check out the price action. Equity shaping up as follows on the S&P 500. Some positive follow-through from yesterday's rally off the back of what looks like de-escalation from the President of the United States, up by 0.5% on the S&P. Least from the NASDAQ, up by almost 1 full percentage point.
Yeah, and you have to add to this, not only did the temperature get taken down here, but the temperature also got taken down in Japan. And we should just note that, since a lot of people were talking about that driving the bond market move, and you are seeing a bid into bonds once again. So all of this helping to fuel a more risk-on feel in equities.
Should we turn to the bond market, 2s, 10s and 30s? I have to say it's gone a bit snoozy again in the bond market, hasn't it? Check it out. Yields really not doing much at all. How much of it was about Greenland? How much of it was about Tokyo, Japan and the JGB market? We're never really going to know, but I do think taking a step back on this week, that was some serious market pushback. Not against the president, but against Tokyo.
I think it was a combination of the two, and you saw the knee-jerk reaction in markets after the speech where people did bid into bonds that much more. But certainly the driver was that suddenly the linchpin of the bond market, keeping a floor under yields, seems to be removed, and that, I think, is destabilizing. I will just say the MOVE index, the volatility, implied volatility in bonds, is still almost nothing. So despite the volatility in the headlines, where is it being priced in markets?
In gold, apparently. Where we're looking for
Fair
what
point.
now? 6K? Is that the Goldman forecast by next week?
Something like it.
6.5, 7,000?
Well, just wait a couple of weeks and maybe it will
keep changing.
Yeah, every single day at the moment. Let's turn to private equity. EQT lining up a $3.2 billion deal for Coller Capital as the booming market for secondaries heats up. Joining us now is Per Franson, the CEO of EQT, the world's second largest private equity firm. Per, good to see you, sir. Congratulations on the deal as well.
Thank you.
What is it about the secondaries market that's really taken off at the moment?
Well, the secondaries market is one of the fastest growing segments in the private markets, and there's a number of structural forces driving that growth. One of them, of course, is the lack of distributions that we've seen in the last couple of years coming out of the industry. But then there's a number of other more long-term underlying structural forces, such as the convergence between private and public markets, but then also, the whole industry becoming more mature, bigger, more complex, and that is driving the need for private market investors to also rebalance and restructure their portfolios, and that's why this part of the market is growing so fast.
Often if you ask people for the distinction, the difference between public and private, one thing they might point to is liquidity. Are you seeing liquidity improve, and with it, price discovery?
In the private markets, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of innovation happening right now, and the whole evolution around the secondary part of the market is an important element in this. There's the trend around continuation vehicles, but then also the emergence of many, private wealth focused open-ended structures that also provide liquidity on a more regular basis. But I would say if you enter the private markets as an investor, you should be prepared to be invested for longer.
Is there a greater degree of skepticism as you meet a growing number of investors, whether it's in the Middle East or elsewhere, about investing in private equity because there haven't been the same kind of exits that they had been expecting? There weren't the same kind of dividends that they were promised at the outset, particularly for the 2020 and 2021 vintages.
Yeah. It's funny, right? I mean, every time there is a downturn in the private equity markets and in deal making, people are questioning the model, right? And You know, the way we think about it at EQT, the private equity market is a long-term growth market, right? And the ownership model in the private markets is a very attractive one. And you can drive a lot of value creation that is not necessarily correlated with what's happening in the public markets, right? And so that's why we believe that the private markets and the private equity model will also be very attractive in the future.
You're a Scandinavian-based company. Scandinavia very much front and focused this Davos for a lot of reasons. I just wonder if you compare what we're hearing among businesses, enthusiasm, excitement for deals, and what we're hearing in politics, which is the divergence and moving away from the United States if you're in Europe and trying to diversify. Do you see that kind of tension playing out in your business?
I mean, it's been great to be here in Davos from that perspective, right? To engage with business leaders, leaders in politics, I'd say the tone has been surprisingly positive, right? Both from business leaders and from political leaders. You mentioned like the focus on deals and transactions. That's been one element, but also the realization that you know, the regions also outside of the US need to get their act together, need to drive a more business-friendly and innovation-friendly agenda. And those have been some of the conversations that I've had. And there's a number of really exciting initiatives here. And I'm in particular excited also about like the interest in public-private partnerships from some of those political leaders. I think all of those are aspects in relation to what's happening in the world.
Given what's going on in Washington and some would call unpredictable policies, do you actually find that you are getting more investors excited about you? Because to Lisa's point, you are outside the U.S. Do you have a leg up now on U.S. competitors?
So a trend that we're definitely seeing is that there's more focus now as a result of the geopolitical uncertainty and volatility among private market investors to achieve a better diversification in their portfolios, right? And that's geographically, but also like across strategies, across asset classes. And that is also one of the trends why the consolidation in the private markets will continue and accelerate, right? Because you need to have the scale, you need to have the geographical reach to be able to engage with investors and help them achieve their strategic portfolio objectives.
But given the mood music, are you still on track for the $250 billion investment into the United States?
We continue to be positive on the U.S., right? I mean, there's a lot of economic growth, a lot of innovation happening in the U.S., right? And also in my conversations with investors, that's not really the topic or the point, right? It's more about having an appropriate diversification in your portfolio, right? But that the U.S. should always be an important part of any public or private markets portfolio. That's unquestionable.
Can you help us understand how you achieve thematic diversification and achieve scale at the same time, when it feels like if you want to do both, you end up in the same place, which is a story surrounded by AI and data centers? How do you get away from that and achieve scale?
Well, I do think that, you know, AI is one of the most attractive themes of our generation, right? And you want to be invested in that theme, but you can also do that in different ways, right? At EQT, we can invest into that theme out of our early stage funds and native AI opportunities, but also at the infrastructure layer, right? And I know that there's a lot of talk about excessive valuations or potentially like overcapacity being built up at that infrastructure layer. That is not what we are seeing at the infrastructure layer. We continue to have a lot of conviction on the opportunity in that part of the AI.
Do you still see more constraints than overcapacity at the moment? And where do you see constraints?
You know, the constraints are in terms of access to power, right? And access to energy. So at EQT, we're also one of the largest investors globally into energy. And so combined with some of the data center investments that we have, we can like have really strategic conversations with some of the hyperscalers. And the demand for AI compute, I mean, vastly still is much higher than the capacity that we see in the market right now.
It's amazing how quickly these tech companies have just become real estate developers, isn't it?
Well, that's what a lot of people say, particularly for some of the neoclouds, et cetera. Question is, will all that real estate be necessary in the same kind of way, maybe in 10 years?
And are they the right guys to manage it? given they haven't managed assets at all really for the last decade?
I think they can find some people who will manage it for them.
Okay.
I think that they probably can here.
I get it. Fair, thank you, sir. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Thanks for dropping by. Congratulations on the deal.
Thank you.
EQT Partners CEO Per Franson there on the situation with AI and the need for diversification.
Yeah, and increasingly diversification, the conversations we've had means to diversify outside of the United States. But the idea that you brought up of how do you diversify away from artificial intelligence, the answer is it just depends where you go within artificial intelligence. You don't try to get away from it because it will be one of the bedrocks of our economy.
To Anne-Marie's question, if you want to invest a lot of money right now and you need to deploy capital, if you take the United States out of the situation, it's quite hard to find those sized opportunities out there outside of America.
Which is the reason why nobody's saying outright, except for a Danish pension fund, we're selling entirely. That said...
What are they selling?
Right, 100, yeah.
Right.
Okay. Not very small.
Apparently Greenland is also looking at doing that.
But the issue to me really is, what is the extra premium on U.S. assets as a result of this sort of slight shift?
It feels like things have changed.
It does.
We'll get into it. Up next, the Stifel CEO, Ron Kosevsky, on the outlook for M&A. Plus, we'll get you some morning movers. We'll touch base with Danny Berger in just a moment. From Davos, Switzerland, you're watching Bloomberg TV.
Have you ever thought about, or would you make a movie for a streaming service? Would you make a Netflix movie?
Man, that's a great question.
I mean, I'm waiting for one where I ask and you go, that was a shitty question.
Yeah. I mean, you know, you good at your job, bro. Like, this is actually the first time anybody's ever asked me that. You know, I'm not here to say what I would and wouldn't do in the future. You know, but the theatrical experience is one that means a great deal to me. It means a great deal to us. I feel a certain responsibility. Like if Fruitville had happened a calendar year later, it probably would have come out on streaming. You know, I've been fortunate enough that everything that I've written and directed has been a theatrical release. So I feel a duty to try to protect that. You know, but that's where I'm at today.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden in London, and these are the stories that set your agenda.
Taking you from the U.S. market's close to the overnight session in Asia, we'll walk you through what you need to know to kickstart Europe's trading day. Live from our European headquarters, we bring you the day's top market-moving stories, unmatched expert analysis, and on-the-ground reporting from across the continent. Tune in to Daybreak Europe, only on Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything.
live from Davos, Switzerland this morning. Good morning to you all. Check out the markets. Positive follow-through. Rally yesterday continues through the session so far early this morning. Equity futures up across the board on the S&P, on the NASDAQ. With your morning movers, let's cross over to Danny Berger for more. Hey, Danny.
Hey, John. That NASDAQ outperformance helped by the memory chip stocks. Another solid pre-market session after only a blip earlier this week. It also helps that Jensen Huang was talking about the trillions of dollars needed for AI infrastructure at Davos. We'll also get Intel earnings after the bell, so that may add or take away from this rally. Moderna, that's also rallying. A study in conjunction with Merck combined two of their drugs, and they saw better outcomes for melanoma patients. That positive study sending shares up 4%. Finally, rounding things off with the ADRs of Alibaba this morning, up 4.7%. A Bloomberg scoop that they are looking at IPOing their chip-making unit, T-Head. It's no surprise that that would be very attractive to investors and unlock a lot of value for Alibaba. So those shares up just under 5%, John.
Danny, thanks for the update. More from Danny in the next hour. Let's turn to the financials. Investors expecting deal activity to heat up in the banking sector. Joining us now is the Stifel CEO, Ron Kruszewski. Ron, good to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
You were in the room yesterday with the president.
Yeah,
Talk
I
to
sure
us
was.
about the mood in that room. What was your impression of things?
Well, I would say the mood of this conference has been a little on edge, all right, to put it politely. And in the room, it was the same thing. But, you know, from my perspective, sitting in the room, I really wasn't surprised. Is anyone surprised that the president does not practice Davos diplomacy? Okay, he just doesn't. And so what would take usually 20 speeches and maybe 10 state dinners to make 1/10 of the point he made in an hour yesterday is just style, all right? So he throws it against the wall. I'm sitting there going, everyone's going like crazy. This will be resolved in a couple of days. It was actually resolved in a couple hours.
Do you think these kind of things are making corporate America more proactive and not less?
That's a great question. Look, I think economic policies, immediate depreciation, the policies that less regulation, what's going on in the bank sector with consolidation, because you don't have as much regulation, is making business more proactive in a good way. I mean, business is good.
Well, to build on that point, proactive in terms also of mergers and acquisitions of scale, because scale is power right now, because you can adjust more easily to a landscape that seems to be shifting pretty quickly.
That's true, but I feel like that's been true my entire career. So scale does matter, and you have to shift to the landscape, whether it's the advent of the IBM computer in 1981, the internet in the late 90s, or AI today. I mean, it's changing all the time.
Well, we saw a huge wave of M&A in terms of the pipeline building at the end of last year, and so far, heading into 2026, we've heard rhetoric saying that it will only be bigger this year. Can you talk about what you're seeing in terms of volumes and what the drivers are?
Well, the drivers, first of all, it's confidence. In the banking sector specifically, you see, if you go back to the past administration, there was no question that the past administration did not want mergers. They threw sand in the gears of M&A. And the Trump administration is encouraging mergers. So you see boards, that believe they can get things done. And combine that with strong fundamentals and, frankly, a need to consolidate because of the scale issue that you were just talking about. It is a robust environment.
In 2024, you scaled back Canadian oil and some fossil fuels. Was that the right approach, given we were about to get a president who's very keen on, quote, drill, baby, drill, and wants to have $50 a barrel when it comes to oil?
We scaled back?
Yeah.
Well, no, you're reading that. I'm not sure what you're reading, but we just had maybe a record year in Canada. Up there with what I see is it's almost like that old Christmas where Cornelius finds gold, and then he gets on his iPhone, he calls our trading desk, and we're raising capital almost immediately. So our business has been robust up there. We did do some scale back, but I think that would not properly characterize what we're doing up there.
You mentioned the president's style yesterday in the speech. You're used to it. Do you like the substance that comes out?
Look, as I said, the substance and the policies, you can even disagree on many policies, okay? Well, Democratic versus Republican, start there, all right? We're going to start 50% of the people are not going to like something that you say, no matter what you say. And so the substance and the economic things I do like. The style is... frankly, it's effective in many ways. I mean, people, they were literally surprised. And I sat there and said, you know what he's going to do? He's going to throw it against the wall, and you all are going to react crazy, and then he's going to come and say, okay, what do you want to do?
Let's make a deal.
People in Davos here should read it. It's an art of the deal.
That was my impression of things as well in the president's first term, and then things kind of changed. I remember when the conversation started around Canada, and you had Pierre Poilievre, conservative. He was going to win a landslide election north of the border. The president came along, went really hard on Canada, and the move changed so quickly. And I was sitting talking about these issues kind of humorously, and I can tell you, my Bloomberg terminal lit up with Canadians who were actually furious with the president and the way he was talking about the country.
Yeah.
And you've seen a change from Carney.
Yeah, I have.
I wonder if we're getting close to a change in Europe too.
Well,
how dangerous that moment actually
is. Never do you, should you question someone's sovereignty or where they're from. And, you know, the president won Indiana by a pretty good margin, okay? And I'm a Hoosier. Go Hoosiers, okay? But had he come out and criticized the Indiana Hoosiers and said that, he might have lost the next election regardless of what his policies are. So I felt that by saying that the 51st state and whatever, look, I don't know the policy, but that's not necessarily how I would try to, you know, persuade someone.
Do you see the business world starting to lean the other way, though? And this is kind of what I'm getting at. Yes, the president's style has been effective, but in some ways it's started to become counterproductive. And you see that in economic activity and the way Canada is now engaging with the US. And I just wonder how close we are to that moment developing in Europe, whether the Europeans themselves are equally as furious with the way the president is talking about the continent at the moment, and whether they'd be looking at boycotting American goods as well.
Well, that'd be like shooting yourself in the foot. All right, who's really going to do that? The Europeans are going to, align with China? I mean, what?
Carney's just done that, hasn't he, in the last week?
Well, that's what he said. Okay, but let's see how that plays. I think the rhetoric should be separated from the substance. I really do, and we are aligned. Okay, the Western Hemisphere is aligned. We should be aligned economically, and what people should hear. And I think what the administration basically said is that the trade policies and the subsidies that have flown through the years. And I'll tell you, a lot of people in the Midwest feel that all this globalization has not exactly helped people in the middle of America. So when the president's out there saying we're going to rebalance trade, we're going to do tariffs to do all of that, when you hear that in Europe, you're not going to like it. So I do feel that communication could probably be more diplomatic, but that might take years and what things are getting done in days. So I'm not sure which way to fall on this. Okay?
We're catching up with the Commerce Secretary a little bit later on this morning. We're looking forward to that conversation. Yeah. He's looking for a punchy 5% GDP growth. I'm not sure if you're close to 5. Well, what are you expecting this year?
Well, you know, let me say it this way, okay? I'm going to just lean on Secretary Ludnick, and if he gets 5%, we're going to have a pretty good year at Stiefel, okay? So, I mean, now you're not going to get me to predict 5%.
There we go.
Okay?
All right, diplomatic. I imagine you'll have a great year if we get 5-6%. Ron, it's good to see you. Thank you, sir.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. The Stiefel CEO, Ron Kashevsky there, are the year ahead for his business and ultimately the U.S. economy. 5-6% GDP growth, maybe?
Yeah, it's 5% baseline, 6% if lower rate interest rates transpires. So, you know, that's the kind of expectation that they're hoping for.
Still got to figure out who's going to be leading the Fed.
Still have to figure out how we get there without inflation.
Maybe next week.
Maybe next week. It's always 1 week, 2 weeks.
1 week, 2 weeks. But it was supposed to be before or after Davos. So next week is after Davos. And the president seems to have trimmed down the list from 4 to 3, but in his mind, he has 1.
Let's give you an update on news elsewhere this morning with your Bloomberg brief. Let's cross back over to Vonnie Quinn. Hey, Vonnie.
Hey, John. Thank you. Russian President Vladimir Putin says he is ready to commit frozen Russian assets in the United States towards rebuilding damaged regions of Ukraine once a deal to end the war is concluded. Putin told Russia's Security Council he could also give $1 billion of the assets for membership to President Trump's Board of Peace. The Supreme Court signaling they're critical of President Donald Trump's push to fire Fed Governor Lisa Cook. The court saying firing her over unproven mortgage fraud allegations could upend the Fed's independence and rattle markets. Both Liberal and Conservative justices sharply questioned the administration's argument. The court is set to rule by July. U.S. natural gas futures rising to the highest level since 2022 as freezing weather sparks a wave of short covering amid risks of stronger demand and disrupted production. Front-month contracts are rising more than 70% this week as the East Coast braces for a severe winter storm. And that is your Bloomberg Brief. Back to you guys in Davos. John.
Vonnie, thank you. More from Vonnie in the next hour. Up next on the program, momentum in private equity.
IPO markets are back, M&A markets are back, LPs are getting liquidity back. The wheel of private equity is turning again, and it couldn't come at a better time.
I just wondered if any of you had a perspective of the reason to, put some of that capital into women's sports.
It's going to create you the fastest return. You will have so much success. If you look at the growth metrics of women's football, selfishly, in this country at the moment, it's phenomenal. We are the fastest growing sport on the planet. Our participation is up in this country. The interest that is around women's football is at a real, to your point, we're at a real moment in time to be able to capitalise on it. And if I was an investor looking to come into football in this country at the moment, I'd certainly be considering women's, because I don't have to invest an astronomical amount to become the best in the world, to really be put on the global stage, to be winning Champions League. Whereas if I wanted to do that in men's football in Europe, that's going to cost me a lot of money.
Welcome to the world of decentralized finance.
Why is it that NFTs have not recovered in the same way that, say, Bitcoin has?
Bloomberg is covering all things crypto.
It's a pretty spectacular story.
The people.
This is the future. This is the 21st century economy.
The transactions.
It snapped up nearly $1 billion of Bitcoin.
And the technology.
We need to build a digital Fort Knox.
That gives people financial freedom, and that's a wonderful thing.
That's extraordinary.
We ride the wave that is Bitcoin.
Bloomberg Crypto, Tuesdays only on Bloomberg.
What is going to be the consequence for U.S. markets?
We are seeing modest gains across European equity markets.
Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute geopolitical news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Stephen Engel at Japan's Akasaka Palace in Tokyo, and this is Bloomberg.
From Davos, Switzerland this morning. Good morning. Positive follow-through. That's the story so far in the equity market. Stocks higher again by 0.5% on the S&P 500 as the president, according to many, de-escalates the situation after escalating the situation the week before. The Nasdaq higher by 0.8%. Under surveillance this morning, momentum in private equity.
The rumors of the death of the private equity industry have been exaggerated. 2025 was already the second highest exit year for our industry. $1.3 trillion were returned to our LPs. That's 80% of the peak of 2021. Our bet is this year we'll surpass 2021. IPO markets are back, M&A markets are back, LPs are getting liquidity back. The wheel of private equity is turning again, and it couldn't come at a better time.
Joining us now, a good friend of this program, Steve Pagliuca, private equity senior advisor at Bain Capital and the founder and CEO of Pax Group. Steve, my friend, it's good to see you, sir.
Hey, great to be here.
Thank you for being here. You've seen it all. You've seen a lot of cycles. Where are we in this one?
Wow, it's interesting. Where we are is maybe I hark back to 1999, 2000, although I think this one's going to be sustainable. I drew a triangle back 25 years ago, honestly, that had a computer, and personal computers first came out in 1981. On one axis, it had the telephone, and it had a convergence of data, the telephone, all into one device, and the internet was the other triangle. Now I think the triangle, and the Davos has really emphasized that, is AI, energy, the need for energy to supply the AI, and I think a hidden one that's starting is quantum computing, which will over $1 trillion in the next 3 years just on that alone. So that's going to buoy things. So I don't think we'll see a massive correction. And the companies that are doing it or funding it are well capitalized. So that's the difference between 1999. There was all small companies, venture backed, and some won, some lost, and then you had a kind of a temporary crash. Right now, they're all well capitalized, and it's existential for them. They really can't stop the spending, even if the return is not great, because if one wins, it's going to hurt the others. So it's existential for those kind of big 7 companies out there.
I know that you spend about 2/3 of your time working with biotech companies, the new technology, and how it affects it. And it strikes me that policy has an increasing focus on affordability and lowering prices of things like pharmaceutical drugs at a time when you need a lot of investment in order to deploy some of this technology in the ways to get all those chips. How do you balance that sort of tension?
Well, we've had that tension for the last 20 years. So someday it may happen, but what's happening now is that the curve to bring out a drug is really shrinking, and you can now simulate clinical trials, you can simulate organs, and you're going to see that coming into effect in the next 3 to 5 years and cutting the costs down, which will then, I think, cut the prices you have to charge to get your payment back.
Do you see the United States still at the forefront of this, or is it shifting in terms of just the development of some of these drugs, but also just the software and the hardware that's necessary?
I think the U.S. is still ahead, but China's been making great strides both on AI and in biotech, so it's the race between the two again.
Steve, can we talk about sports? First thing I said to you,
crushing defeat last night.
1-0 at one point. What happened?
I don't know. I feel bad for the team. It was one of those. That's why football is so exciting. If you look at all the statistics, we should have won the game 4-0. We had 16 shots versus 4 shots. Everything on target. Just nothing went in, and they made some incredible plays. So
you've done some incredible things with Atalanta Football Club. I saw Alex Del Piero downstairs about 2 hours ago. Italian legend. He was in the mix of the peak of Italian football, which was the 90s through